Story 5 of The Dwarf's Chamber and Other Stories by Fergus Hume. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Story 5, The Greenstone God and the Stockbroker. As a rule, the average detective gets twice the credit he deserves. I am not talking of the novelist's miracle-monger, but of the flesh-and-blood reality, who is liable to err, and who frequently proves such liability. You can take it as certain that a detective who sets down a clean run and no hitch as entirely due to his astucity is young in years and still younger in experience. Older men, who have been bamboozled 100 times by the craft of criminality, recognize the influence of chance to make or mar. There you have it. 9 times out of 10, chance does more in clinching a case than all the dexterity and mother wit of the man in charge. The exception must be engineered by an infallible apostle. Such a one is unknown to me, out of print. This opinion, based rather on collective experience than on any one episode, can be substantiated by several incontrovertible facts. In this instance, one will suffice. Therefore, I take the Brixton case to illustrate chance as a factor in human affairs. Had it not been for that Maori fetish, but such rather ends than begins the story, therefore it were wise to dismiss it for the moment. Yet that piece of greenstone hanged a person mentioned hereafter. When Mr. and Mrs. Paul Vincent set up housekeeping at Ulster Lodge, they were regarded as decided acquisitions to Brixton society. She, pretty and musical; he, smart in looks, moderately well off, and an excellent tennis player. Their progenitors, his father and her mother, both since deceased, had lived a life of undoubted middle-class respectability. The halo thereof still environed their children, who were, in consequence of such inherited grace and their own individualisms, much sought out by genteel Brixtonians. Moreover, this popular couple were devoted to each other, and even after 3 years of marriage they posed still as lovers. This was as it should be, and by admiring friends and relations the Vincents were regarded as paragons of matrimonial perfection. Vincent was a stockbroker, therefore he passed most of his time in the city. Judge, then, of the commotion when pretty Mrs. Vincent was discovered in the study, stabbed to the heart. So aimless a crime were scarce imaginable. She had many friends, no known enemies, yet she came to this tragic end. Closer examination revealed that the escritoire had been broken into, and Mr. Vincent declared himself the poorer by £200. Primarily, therefore, robbery was the sole object, but by reason of Mrs. Vincent's interference, the thief had been converted into a murderer. So excellently had the assassin chosen his time, that such choice argued a close acquaintance with the domestic economy of Ulster Lodge. The husband was detained in town till midnight. The servants, cook and housemaid, on leave to attend wedding festivities, were absent till 11 o'clock. Mrs. Vincent, therefore, was absolutely alone in the house for 6 hours, during which period the crime had been committed. The servants discovered the body of their unfortunate mistress and raised the alarm at once. Later on, Vincent arrived to find his wife dead, his house in possession of the police, and the 2 servants in hysterics. For that night nothing could be done. But at dawn a move was made towards elucidating the mystery. At this point I came into the story. Instructed at 9 o'clock to take charge of the case, by 10 I was on the spot, noting details and collecting evidence. Beyond removal of the body nothing had been disturbed, and the study was in precisely the same condition as when the crime was discovered. I examined carefully the apartment, and afterwards interrogated the cook, the housemaid, and lastly the master of the house. The result gave me slight hope of securing the assassin. The room, a fair-sized one looking out onto a lawn between house and road, was furnished in cheap bachelor fashion. An old-fashioned desk placed at right angles to the window, a round table reaching nigh the sill, 2 armchairs, 3 of the ordinary cane-seated kind, and on the mantelpiece an arrangement of pipes, pistols, boxing gloves, and foils. One of these latter was missing. A single glimpse showed how terrible a struggle had taken place before the murderer had overpowered his victim. The tablecloth lay disorderly on the floor, 2 of the lighter chairs were overturned, and the desk, with several drawers open, was hacked about considerably. No key was in the door lock, which faced the escritoire, and the window snick was fastened securely. Further search resulted in the following discoveries. 1. A hatchet used for chopping wood, found near the desk. 2. A foil with the button broken off, lying under the table. 3. A greenstone idol, edged under the fender. The cook, defiantly courageous by reason of brandy, declared that she had left the house at 4 o'clock on the previous day, and had returned close on 11. The back door, to her surprise, was open. With the housemaid she went to inform her mistress of this fact, and found the body lying midway between door and fireplace. At once she called in the police. Her master and mistress were a most attached couple, and, so far as she knew, they had no enemies. Similar evidence was obtained from the housemaid, with the additional information that the hatchet belonged to the woodshed. The other rooms were undisturbed. Poor young Vincent was so broken down by the tragedy that he could hardly answer my questions with calmness. Sympathizing with his natural grief, I interrogated him as delicately as was possible, and I am bound to admit that he replied with remarkable promptitude and clearness. "What do you know of this unhappy affair?" I asked, when we were alone in the drawing-room. He refused to stay in the study, as was surely natural under the circumstances. "Absolutely nothing," he replied. "I went to the city yesterday at 10 in the morning, and as I had business to do, I wired my wife I would not return till midnight. She was full of health and spirits when I last saw her, but now—" Incapable of further speech, he made a gesture of despair. Then, after a pause, he added, "Have you any theory on the subject?" "Judging from the wrecked condition of the desk, I should say robbery." "Robbery?" he interrupted, changing colour. "Yes, that was the motive. I had £200 locked up in the desk." "In gold or notes?" "The latter, 450s, Bank of England." "You are sure they are missing?" "Yes. The drawer in which they were placed is smashed to pieces." "Did anyone know you had placed £200 therein?" "No, save my wife, and yet—" "Ah!" he said, breaking off abruptly. "That is impossible." "What is impossible?" "I will tell you when I hear your theory." "You got that notion out of the novels of the shilling sort," I answered dryly. "Every detective doesn't theorize on the instant. I haven't any particular theory that I know of. Whoever committed this crime must have known your wife was alone in the house, and that there was £200 locked up in the desk. Did you mention these 2 facts to anyone?" Vincent pulled his moustache in some embarrassment. I guessed by the action that he had been indiscreet. "I don't wish to get an innocent person into trouble," he said at length, "but I did mention it to a man called Roy." "For what reason?" "Well, it is a bit of a story. I lost 200 to a friend at cards, and drew 450s to pay him. He went out of town, so I locked up the money in my desk for safety. Last night Roy came to me at the club, much agitated, and asked me to loan him 100. Said it meant ruin else. I offered him a cheque, but he wanted cash. I then told him I had left 200 at home, so at the moment I could not lay my hand on it. He asked if he could not go to Brixton for it, but I said the house was empty and—" "But it wasn't empty," I interrupted. "I believed it would be. I knew the servants were going to the wedding, and I thought my wife, instead of spending a lonely evening, would call on some friend." "Well, and after you told Roy that the house was empty? He went away, looking awfully cut up, and swore he must have the money at any price. But it was quite impossible he could have anything to do with this." "I don't know. You told him where the money was, and that the house was unprotected, as you thought. What was more probable than that he should have come down with the intention of stealing the money? If so, what follows? Entering by the back door, he takes the hatchet from the woodshed to open the desk. Your wife, hearing a noise, discovers him in the study. In a state of frenzy, he snatches a foil from the mantelpiece and kills her, then decamps with the money. There is your theory, and a mighty bad one for Roy." "You don't intend to arrest him?" asked Vincent quickly. "Not on insufficient evidence. If he committed the crime and stole the money, it is certain that, sooner or later, he will change the notes. Now, if I had the numbers—" "Here are the numbers," said Vincent, producing his pocket-book. "I always take the numbers of such large notes. But surely," he added, as I copied them down, "surely you don't think Roy guilty?" "I don't know. I should like to know his movements on that night." "I cannot tell you. He saw me at the Chestnut Club about 7 o'clock, and left immediately afterwards. I kept my business appointment, went to the Alhambra, and then returned home." "Give me Roy's address, and describe his personal appearance." "He is a medical student, and lodges at No. Gower Street. Tall, fair-haired, a good-looking young fellow." "And his dress last night?" "He wore evening dress, concealed by a fawn-coloured overcoat." I duly noted these particulars, and I was about to take my leave, when I recollected the green stone idol. It was so strange an object to find in prosaic Brixton that I could not help thinking it must have come there by accident. "By the way, Mr. Vincent," said I, producing the monstrosity, "is this green stone god your property?" "I never saw it before," replied he, taking it in his hands. "Is it— Ah!" he added, dropping the idol, "there is blood on it." "'Tis the blood of your wife, sir. If it does not belong to you, it does to the murderer. From the position in which this was found, I fancy it slipped out of his breast pocket as he stood over his victim. As you see, it is stained with blood. He must have lost his presence of mind, else he would not have left behind so damning a piece of evidence. This idol, sir, will hang the assassin of Mrs. Vincent." "I hope so, but unless you are sure of Roy, do not mar his life by accusing him of this crime." "I certainly should not arrest him without sufficient proof," I answered promptly, and so took my departure. Vincent showed up very well in this preliminary conversation. Much as he desired to punish the criminal, yet he was unwilling to subject Roy to possibly unfounded suspicions. Had I not forced the club episode out of him, I doubt whether he would have told it. As it was, the information gave me the necessary clue. Roy alone knew that the notes were in the escritoire, and imagined, owing to the mistake of Vincent, that the house was empty. Determined to have the money at any price, his own words, he intended but robbery, till the unexpected appearance of Mrs. Vincent merged the lesser in the greater crime. My first step was to advise the bank that 4 50-pound notes, numbered so and so, were stolen, and that the thief or his deputy would probably change them within a reasonable period. I did not say a word about the crime, and kept all special details out of the newspapers, for as the murderer would probably read up the reports so as to shape his course by the action of the police, I judged it wiser that he should know as little as possible. Those minute press notices do more harm than good. They gratify the morbid appetite of the public and put the criminal on his guard. Thereby the police work in the dark. But he, thanks to the posting up of special reporters, knows the doings of the law and baffles it accordingly. The greenstone idol worried me considerably. I wanted to know how it had got into the study of Ulster Lodge. When I knew that, I could nail my man. But there was considerable difficulty to overcome before such knowledge was available. Now, a curiosity of this kind is not a common object in this country. A man who owns one must have come from New Zealand, or have obtained it from a New Zealand friend. He could not have picked it up in London. If he did, he would not carry it constantly about with him. It was therefore my idea that the murderer had received the idol from a friend on the day of the crime. That friend, to possess such an idol, must have been in communication with New Zealand. The chain of thought is somewhat complicated, but it began with curiosity about the idol, and ended in my looking up the list of steamers going to the Antipodes. Then I carried out a little design which need not be mentioned at this moment. In due time it will fit in with the hanging of Mrs. Vincent's assassin. Meanwhile I followed up the clue of the bank notes, and left the greenstone idol to evolve its own destiny. Thus I had two strings in my bow. The crime was committed on the 20th of June, and on the 23rd, two £50 notes with numbers corresponding to those stolen were paid into the Bank of England. I was astonished at the little care exercised by the criminal in concealing his crime, but still more so when I learned that the money had been banked by a very respectable solicitor. Furnished with the address, I called on this gentleman. Mr. Maudsley received me politely, and he had no hesitation in telling me how the notes had come into his possession. I did not state my primary reason for the inquiry. "I hope there is no trouble about these notes," said he, when I explained my errand. "I have had sufficient already." "Indeed, Mr. Maudsley, and in what way?" For answer he touched the bell, and when it was answered, "Ask Mr. Ford to step this way," he said. Then turning to me, "I must reveal what I had hoped to keep secret, but I trust the revelation will remain with yourself." "That is as I may decide after hearing it. I am a detective, Mr. Maudsley, and you may be sure I do not make these inquiries out of idle curiosity." Before he could reply, a slender, weak-looking young man, nervously excited, entered the room. This was Mr. Ford, and he looked from me to Maudsley with some apprehension. "This gentleman," said his employer, not unkindly, "comes from Scotland Yard about the money you paid me 2 days ago." "It is all right, I hope," stammered Ford, turning red and pale and red again. "Where did you get the money?" I asked, parrying this question. "From my sister." I started when I heard this answer, and with good reason. My inquiries about Roy had revealed that he was in love with a hospital nurse whose name was Clara Ford. Without doubt she had obtained the notes from Roy after he had stolen them from Ulster Lodge. But why the necessity of the robbery? "Why did you get £100 from your sister?" I asked Ford. He did not answer, but looked appealingly at Maudsley. That gentleman interposed. "We must make a clean breast of it, Ford," he said, with a sigh. "If you have committed a second crime to conceal the first, I cannot help you. This time matters are not at my discretion." "I have committed no crime," said Ford desperately, turning to me. "Sir, I may as well admit that I embezzled £100 from Mr. Maudsley to pay a gambling debt. He kindly and most generously consented to overlook the delinquency if I replaced the money. Not having it myself, I asked my sister. She, a poor hospital nurse, had not the amount. Yet, as non-payment meant ruin to me, she asked a Mr. Julian Roy to help her. He at once agreed to do so, and gave her two £50 notes. She handed them to me, and I gave them to Mr. Maudsley, who paid them into the bank." This, then, was the reason of Roy's remark. He did not refer to his own ruin, but to that of Ford. To save this unhappy man, and for love of the sister, he had committed the crime. I did not need to see Clara Ford, but at once made up my mind to arrest Roy. The case was perfectly clear, and I was fully justified in taking this course. Meanwhile, I made Maudsley and his clerk promise silence, as I did not wish Roy to be put on his guard by Miss Ford through her brother. "Gentlemen," I said, after a few moments' pause, "I cannot at present explain my reasons for asking these questions, as it would take too long, and I have no time to lose. Keep silent about this interview until to-morrow, and by that time you shall know all." "Has Ford got into fresh trouble?" asked Maudsley anxiously. "No, but someone else has." "My sister," began Ford faintly, when I interrupted him at once. "Your sister is all right, Mr. Ford. Pray trust in my discretion. No harm shall come to her or to you, if I can help it. But above all, be silent." This they readily promised, and I returned to Scotland Yard, quite satisfied that Roy would get no warning. The evidence was so clear that I could not doubt the guilt of Roy. Else how had he come in possession of the notes? Already there was sufficient proof to hang him, yet I'd hoped to clinch the certainty by proving his ownership of the green stone idol. It did not belong to Vincent or to his dead wife, yet some one must have brought it into the study. Why not Roy, who to all appearances had committed the crime, the more so as the image was splashed with the victim's blood? There was no difficulty in obtaining a warrant, and with this I went off to Gower Street. Roy loudly protested his innocence. He denied all knowledge of the crime and of the idol. I expected the denial, but I was astonished at the defence he put forth. It was very ingenious, but so manifestly absurd that it did not shake my belief in his guilt. I let him talk himself out, which perhaps was wrong, but he would not be silent, and then I took him off in a cab. "I swear I did not commit the crime," he said, passionately. "No one was more astonished than I at the news of Mrs. Vincent's death." "Yet you were at Ulster Lodge on the night in question." "I admit it," he replied frankly. "Were I guilty I would not do so. But I was there at the request of Vincent." "I must remind you that all you say now will be used in evidence against you." "I don't care. I must defend myself. I asked Vincent for £100, and—" "Of course you did, to give to Miss Ford." "How do you know that?" he asked sharply. "From her brother, through Maudsley. He paid the notes supplied by you into the bank. If you wanted to conceal your crime, you should not have been so reckless." "I have committed no crime," retorted Roy fiercely. "I obtained the money from Vincent at the request of Miss Ford, to save her brother from being convicted for embezzlement." "Vincent denies that he gave you the money." "Then he lies. I asked him at the Chestnut Club for £100. He had not that much on him, but said that 200 were in his desk at home. As it was imperative that I should have the money on the night, I asked him to let me go down for it." "And he refused?" "He did not. He consented, and gave me a note to Mrs. Vincent, instructing her to hand me over £100. I went to Brixton, got the money in 250s, and gave them to Miss Ford. When I left Ulster Lodge between 8 and 9, Mrs. Vincent was in perfect health and quite happy." "An ingenious defence," said I doubtfully, "but Vincent absolutely denies that he gave you the money." Roy stared hard at me to see if I was joking. Evidently the attitude of Vincent puzzled him greatly. "That is ridiculous," said he quietly. "He wrote a note to his wife instructing her to hand me the money." "Where is that note?" "I gave it to Mrs. Vincent." "It cannot be found," I answered. "If such a note were in her possession it would now be in mine." "Don't you believe me?" "How can I, against the evidence of those notes and the denial of Vincent?" "But he surely does not deny that he gave me the money." "He does." "He must be mad," said Roy in dismay. "One of my best friends, and to tell so great a falsehood. Why, if—" "You had better be silent," I said, weary of this foolish talk. "If what you say is true, Vincent will exonerate you from complicity in the crime. If things occurred as you say, there is no sense in his denial." This latter remark was made to stop the torrent of his speech. It was not my business to listen to incriminating declarations, or to ingenious defences. All that sort of thing is for judge and jury. Therefore I ended the conversation as above, and marched off my prisoner. Whether the birds of the air carry news I do not know, but they must have been busy on this occasion, for next morning every newspaper in London was congratulating me on my clever capture of the supposed murderer. Some detectives would have been gratified by this public laudation. I was not. Roy's passionate protestations of innocence made me feel uneasy, and I doubted whether, after all, I had the right man under lock and key. Yet the evidence was strong against him. He admitted having been with Mrs. Vincent on the fatal night. He admitted possession of two £50 notes. His only defence was the letter of the stockbroker, and this was missing, if indeed it had ever been written. Vincent was terribly upset by the arrest of Roy. He liked the young man, and he had believed in his innocence so far as was possible. But in the face of such strong evidence he was forced to believe him guilty. Yet he blamed himself severely that he had not lent the money, and so averted the catastrophe. "I had no idea that the matter was of such moment," he said to me, "else I would have gone down to Brixton myself and have given him the money. Then his frenzy would have spared my wife, and himself a death on the scaffold." "What do you think of his defence?" "It is wholly untrue. I did not write a note, nor did I tell him to go to Brixton. Why should I, when I fully believed no one was in the house?" "It was a pity you did not go home, Mr. Vincent, instead of to the Alhambra." "It was a mistake," he assented, "but I had no idea Roy would attempt the robbery. Besides, I was under engagement to go to the theatre with my friend, Dr. Monson." "Do you think that idol belongs to Roy?" "I can't say. I never saw it in his possession." "Why?" "Because I firmly believe that if Roy had not the idol in his pocket on that fatal night, he is innocent." "Oh, you look astonished, but the man who murdered your wife owns that idol." The morning after this conversation a lady called at Scotland Yard and asked to see me concerning the Brixton case. Fortunately I was then in the neighbourhood, and, guessing who she was, I afforded her the interview she sought. When all left the room she raised her veil, and I saw before me a noble-looking woman, somewhat resembling Mr. Maudsley's clerk. Yet, by some contradiction of nature, her face was the more virile of the two. "You are Miss Ford," I said, guessing her identity. "I am Clara Ford," she answered quietly. "I have come to see you about Mr. Roy." "I am afraid nothing can be done to save him." "Something must be done," she said passionately. "We are engaged to be married, and all a woman can do to save her lover I will do. Do you believe him to be guilty?" "In the face of such evidence, Miss Ford." "I don't care what evidence is against him," she retorted. "He is as innocent of the crime as I am. Do you think that a man fresh from the committal of a crime would place the money won by that crime in the hands of the woman he professes to love? I tell you he is innocent." "Mr. Vincent doesn't think so." "Mr. Vincent!" said Miss Ford with a scornful emphasis. "Oh, yes. I quite believe he would think Julian guilty." "Surely not, if it were possible to think otherwise. He is, or rather was, a staunch friend to Mr. Roy." "So staunch that he tried to break off the match between us. Listen to me, sir. I have told no one before, but I tell you now. Mr. Vincent is a villain. He pretended to be the friend of Julian, and yet he dared to make proposals to me, dishonourable proposals, for which I could have struck him. He, a married man, a pretended friend, wished me to leave Julian and fly with him." "Surely you are mistaken, Miss Ford. Mr. Vincent was most devoted to his wife." "He did not care at all for his wife," she replied steadily. "He was in love with me. To save Julian annoyance, I did not tell him of the insults offered to me by Mr. Vincent. Now that Julian is in trouble by an unfortunate mistake, Mr. Vincent is delighted." "It is impossible. I assure you Vincent is very sorry to—" "You do not believe me," she said, interrupting. "Very well. I shall give you proof of the truth. Come to my brother's rooms at Bloomsbury. I shall send for Mr. Vincent, and if you are concealed you shall hear from his own lips how glad he is that my lover and his wife are removed from the path of his dishonourable passion." "I will come, Miss Ford, but I think you are mistaken in Vincent." "You shall see," she replied coldly. Then, with a sudden change of tone, "Is there no way of saving Julian? I am sure that he is innocent. Appearances are against him, but it was not he who committed the crime. Is there no way, no way?" Moved by her earnest appeal, I produced the greenstone idol, and told her all I had done in connection with it. She listened eagerly, and readily grasped at the hope thus held out to her of saving Roy. When in possession of all the facts, she considered in silence for some 2 minutes. At the end of that time she drew down her veil and prepared to take her departure. "Come to my brother's rooms in Alfred Place, near Tottenham Court Road," said she, holding out her hand. "I promise you that there you shall see Mr. Vincent in his true character. Good-bye till Monday at 3 o'clock." From the colour of her face and the bright light in her eye, I guessed that she had some scheme in her head for the saving of Roy. I think myself clever, but after that interview at Alfred's Place, I declare I am but a fool compared to this woman. She put two and two together, ferreted out unguessed of evidence, and finally produced the most wonderful result. When she left me, at this moment, the greenstone idol was in her pocket. With that she hoped to prove the innocence of her lover, and the guilt of another person. It was the cleverest thing I ever saw in my life. The inquest on the body of Mrs. Vincent resulted in a verdict of wilful murder against some person or persons unknown. Then she was buried, and all London waited for the trial of Roy. He was brought up, charged with the crime, reserved his defence, and in due course he was committed for trial. Meantime I called on Miss Ford at the appointed time, and found her alone. "Mr. Vincent will be here shortly," she said calmly. "I see Julian is committed for trial." "And he has reserved his defence." "I shall defend him," said she, with a strange look in her face. "I am not afraid for him now. He saved my unhappy brother. I shall save him." "Have you discovered anything?" "I have discovered a good deal. Hush! That is Mr. Vincent," she added as a cab drew up to the door. "Hide yourself behind this curtain, and do not appear until I give you the signal." Wondering what she was about to do, I concealed myself as directed. The next moment Vincent was in the room, and then ensued one of the strangest of scenes. She received him coldly, and motioned him to a seat. Vincent was nervous, but she might have been a stone, so little emotion did she display. "I have sent for you, Mr. Vincent," she said, "to ask for your help in releasing Julian." "How can I help you?" he answered in amazement. "Willingly would I do so, but it is out of my power." "I don't think it is." "I assure you, Clara," he began eagerly, when she cut him short. "Yes, call me Clara. Say that you love me. Lie like all men, and yet refuse to do what I wish." "I am not going to help Julian to marry you," declared he sullenly. "You know that I love you. I love you dearly. I wish to marry you. Is not that declaration rather soon after the death of your wife?" "My wife is gone, poor soul. Let her rest." "Yet you loved her?" "I never loved her," he said, rising to his feet. "I love you. From the first moment I saw you, I loved you. My wife is dead. Julian Roy is in prison on a charge of murdering her. With these obstacles removed, there is no reason why we should not marry." "If I marry you," she said slowly, "will you help Julian to refute this charge?" "I cannot. The evidence is too strong against him." "You know that he is innocent, Mr. Vincent." "I do not. I believe that he murdered my wife." "You believe that he murdered your wife," she reiterated, coming a step closer and holding out the greenstone idol. "Do you believe that he dropped this in the study when his hand struck the fatal blow?" "I don't know," he said coolly, glancing at the idol. "I never saw it before." "Think again, Mr. Vincent, think again. Who was it that went to the Alhambra at 8 o'clock with Dr. Monson, and met there the captain of a New Zealand steamer with whom he was acquainted?" "It was I," said Vincent defiantly. "And what of that?" "This," she said in a loud voice. "This captain gave you the greenstone idol at the Alhambra, and you placed it in your breast pocket. Shortly afterwards you followed to Brixton the man whose death you had plotted. You repaired to your house, killed your unhappy wife, who received you in all innocence, took the balance of the money, hacked the desk, and then dropped by accident this idol which convicts you of the crime." During this speech she advanced step by step towards the wretched man, who, pale and anguished, retreated before her fury. He came right to my hiding place and almost fell into my arms. I had heard enough to convince me of his guilt, and the next moment I was struggling with him. "It is a lie," he said hoarsely, trying to escape. "It is true," said I, pinning him down. "From my soul I believe you to be guilty." During the fight his pocket-book fell on the floor, and the papers therein were scattered. Miss Ford picked up one spotted with blood. "The proof," she said, holding it before us, "the proof that Julian spoke the truth. There is the letter written by you which authorized your unhappy wife to give him £100. Vincent saw that all was against him, and gave in without further struggle, like the craven he was. "Fate is too strong for me," he said, when I snapped the handcuffs on his wrists. "I admit the crime. It was for love of you that I did it. I hated my wife, who was a drag on me, and I hated Roy, who loved you. In one sweep I thought to rid myself of both. His application for the money put the chance into my hand. I went to Brixton, found that my wife had given the money as directed, and then I killed her with the foil snatched from the wall, smashed the desk and overturned the chair, to favour an idea of the robbery, and then I left the house. Driving to a higher station than Brixton, I caught a train and was speedily back at the Alhambra. Monson never suspected my absence, thinking I was in a different corner of the house. I had thus an alibi ready. Had it not been for that letter, which I was fool enough to keep, and that infernal idol that dropped out of my pocket, I should have hanged Roy and married you. As it turns out, the idol has betrayed me. And now, sir," he added, turning to me, "you had better take me to gaol." I did so there and then. After the legal formalities were gone through, Julian Roy was released, and ultimately married Miss Ford. Vincent was hanged, as he well deserved to be for so cowardly a crime. My reward was the greenstone god, which I keep as a memento of a very curious case. Some weeks later Miss Ford told me the way in which she had laid the trap. "When you revealed your suspicions about the idol," she said, "I was convinced that Vincent had something to do with the crime. You mentioned Dr. Monson as having been with him at the Alhambra. He is one of the doctors at the hospital in which I am employed. I asked him about the idol and showed it to him. He remembered it being given to Vincent by the captain of the Kaitangata. The curious look of the thing had impressed itself on his memory. On hearing this, I went to the docks and I saw the captain. He recognized the idol and remembered giving it to Vincent. From what you told me, I guessed the way in which the plot had been carried out, so I spoke to Vincent as you heard. Most of it was guesswork, and only when I saw that letter was I absolutely sure of his guilt. It was due to the greenstone god. So I think, but to chance also. But for the accident of the idol dropping out of Vincent's pocket, Roy would have been hanged for a crime of which he was innocent. Therefore do I say that in 9 cases out of 10, chance does more to clinch a case than all the dexterity of the man in charge. End of Story 5. Story 6 of The Dwarf's Chamber and Other Stories by Fergus Hume. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Story 6. The Jesuit and the Mexican Coin. "Your reputation as a detective is known in Devon," said Lord Tormouth. "Therefore I wish you to conduct the case. It could not be in better hands." "I feel flattered by your preference, my lord," said I, "so I shall take charge of it with pleasure. But you must give me a free hand." "A free hand and as much money as you require. I see too much of the Pope's influence in England to grudge aught likely to keep the Kempion estates out of the priest's hands." "Amen to that," I answered, being a Protestant myself. "And now, my lord, give me your version of the affair." "It is now some 6 months old," he replied, "and not being so young as I was, I am apt to forget details. Roughly speaking, the story is as follows. Are you ready?" One moment. My notebook. Thank you. Now I am all attention. James Kempion died some 3 years back, leaving his estates to Francis, his son. The boy is now 18 years of age, and he has a rent roll of £8,000 a year. His father, like all the Kempions, was a Roman Catholic, and quite under the thumb of his confessor, Father Condy. Yet he defied the Church and the priests sufficiently to marry a Protestant lady, Miss Lee of Barnstaple. She died, poor soul, in giving birth to Francis, and with her last breath she implored Kempion to have the child brought up in the Anglican communion. Despite the wrath of Father Condy, this was done. Being a Protestant myself, and a firm friend to Kempion, I supported the lad. All went well till Kempion, while on a visit to his brother in Mexico, chose to marry a second time. You did not mention the brother before. My failing memory, sir. John Kempion, the brother of James, is a red-hot papist, and at present owns the estates. But what about the heir, Francis? I'm coming to that, said Lord Tormouth grimly. As I said, James Kempion married a second time a Mexican lady. I am not acquainted with her name or her family. Of Spanish descent? Of course. The fickle, faithless blood of Spain is in her veins. When Kempion brought her home, she and the boy got on together capitally. Then James died, and left his heir to the tender mercies of Father Conde and La Senora. La Senora? So she is called by the countryside. When Kempion died, John came back to the old place, and remained for 2 years and a half. At the end of that time, Francis disappeared. I thought you said he was drowned while bathing. That is the common report, with which I don't hold. One evening Francis told his stepmother that he was going to the beach for a swim in the moonlight. Since then he has not been seen. They found his clothes on the sands, and as the current sweeps strongly round that point of the coast, it was supposed that he had been carried out to sea. Then this idea of his death was generally accepted? Yes, by all, even by the lawyers. John Kempion, a Catholic, mark you, sir, a Catholic, was the next heir to the estates, and entered into possession. It is said, concluded Lord Tormouth, ironically, that he intends to marry his brother's widow. I suppose he can do so? What do I know of their heathen customs, sir? La Senora comes from Mexico, and John Kempion has lived there the greater part of his life. I am ignorant of their notions of morality, but I am certain that when the year of mourning for Francis is out, there will be a match between John Kempion and La Senora. Then, as now, Father Conde will reign supreme, and use the moneys for the Church's benefit. Then you don't think Francis is dead? No, I do not, and it is the truth of this which I wish you to prove. It is my opinion, sir, continued Tormouth, tapping me on the knee, that the Jesuits carried off Francis so as to avert the disaster of a Protestant head to the Kempion family. They have murdered him, you think? I don't go so far as that. I will do Father Conde the justice to say that outside his religion he is a kind-hearted man. No, sir, Francis Kempion is not dead. He is alive, but he has been spirited away by the Jesuits for their own ends. So you want me to find Francis Kempion? Ay, sir, spare neither time nor money, but bring back my dear boy. It is a difficult task you have set me, my lord, I answered ruefully. However, I will do my best. Firstly, I should like to see the beach where the clothes were found. My servant will take you there to-morrow. Secondly, it is necessary that I see the Kempion household. That is rather difficult. I am not on speaking terms with John. However, you can call, on the pretext of looking at their picture gallery. While there you will doubtless see some of the family and Father Conde. 'Tis a shabby method of getting inside the gates, but in this affair we must not be squeamish. Very good, my lord. I shall commence work to-morrow. Lord Tormouth's seat is, as every one knows, situate on the north coast of Devon, within easy reach of Ilfracombe. It is built on a wooded hill which slopes down to a sandy estuary, and opposite rises another hill crowned by Kempion Hall. I had come down from London in response to his summons, and was not ill pleased to find myself among such beautiful scenery even in December. Alas, though I did not then guess, I had but little time to sojourn in that rural paradise. The exigencies of the case sent me far across the ocean within a fortnight. Next day, escorted by the confidential valet of Lord Tormouth, I crossed the estuary and found myself on the long stretch of beach fringing the Kempion woods. A quarter of a mile's trudge brought us round a corner to a little bay, almost landlocked by the silt at the narrow mouth. Standing at the corner, I could see the current swirl in a curve, and, following the indentations of the land, sweep out towards Lundy Island. It was from here, said the servant, that Francis Kempion had started on that fatal swim. As I surveyed the place, I saw at once the circumstances which gave rise to the doubts of Lord Tormouth. If Francis Kempion stepped into the water of the little bay, he certainly would not be so rash as to venture into the current without noting the force of the sweep, as he must assuredly have done. He would surely have been content to paddle about the safe bay in place of risking his life in the outer waters. After this examination, I was as certain as Tormouth that Kempion was not drowned. If so, he must have been drawn into the current, for I made sure that no man in his senses would have ventured in of his own free will. The servant, a very particular man, pointed out the exact spot where the clothes had been found. I looked round carelessly enough, not expecting to find anything connected with the unfortunate gentleman. As 6 months had elapsed since his disappearance, this was hardly to be expected. My casual glances, however, picked out a discoloured coin lying lightly on the sand. It proved to be a Mexican peso, value 4 shillings and some odd pence. The discovery set me thinking, and engendered a theory which later on I unfolded to Lord Tormouth. Meanwhile, I slipped the coin into my pocket, dismissed the servant as no longer necessary, and walked up the hill to Kempion Hall. There was some difficulty in seeing the pictures, as the family were in residence. I represented that I was leaving the neighbourhood in 24 hours, so the ancient housekeeper consented that I should walk through the gallery. Mr. Kempion had gone to the Dower House to see La Senora, said the garrulous old lady, and only Father Condy was within doors. She accompanied me to the picture gallery, and reeled off her changeless tale of the Kempion glories. In the midst of such eloquence, a servant summoned her, and she left me, for the moment, to my own devices. I walked slowly around, and ultimately faced 3 portraits. Without doubt they were those of James Kempion, his son Francis, and La Senora. The men were handsome, and the lady was a charming brunette, who smiled bewitchingly from the canvas. "So that is Francis Kempion," I said aloud, looking at the brave, boyish face. "That is Francis Kempion," echoed a voice at my elbow. I turned and saw the priest. He was a tall, well-set man, with a keen face and restless eyes. "What do you know about Francis Kempion?" said he sharply. "Nothing, save that he was drowned," I answered. "At least, so says the village gossip." "Yes, poor lad, he was drowned," replied the Jesuit, bringing out the last word with an effort which cast discredit on his training. "A Protestant, wasn't he, sir?" said I, keeping my eyes on the picture. "The Kempions, sir, are devout sons of the true Church," he returned stiffly. "I perceive you are a stranger here." Then, in response to my bow, "May I inquire why you ask such a question?" "Idle curiosity, sir, nothing more." "And the general opinion is in favour of Francis Kempion's death by drowning?" "Yes, though for one who must have known every shoal and shallow of the coast, I think it was unwise of him to have ventured into that current." Father Condy looked at me, and I at him. He was apparently trying to fathom my meaning. However, I kept my face, and with a courteous bow he turned away. Still looking at the picture, I caught a glimpse of his backward glance out of the tail of my eye. Evidently my remark had aroused his suspicions. Near the gates I met Kempion and La Signora riding homeward. When they saw me their laughter ceased. She cast a cold look on me as I took off my hat, but a shadow passed over his face. I wonder, thought I, setting my face gatewards, I wonder if John Kempion consented to the kidnapping of his nephew, so as to enjoy the property himself. Lord Tormouth was waiting eagerly for my return, and we talked for fully 2 hours. He still clung to his idea that Francis had been spirited away by the Jesuit, so that the Kempion revenues might revert once more to the Church. On the other hand, I was inclined to suspect the present holder of the estates. In proof of this I produced the peso. Lord Tormouth examined it and shrugged his shoulders. "I don't think much of that," said he, turning it over. "It might be a stray coin of the Armada. 'Tis known that several treasure ships of Mexican moneys were wrecked on our coasts." "Look at the date, my lord." 1886, he read eagerly. "Why, God bless me, sir, this coin was struck last year." "Exactly. Therefore it must have been brought from Mexico shortly before Francis disappeared. I found it on the beach where he was last seen. So you think that his uncle had something to do with the kidnapping?" "That is my idea." "But he was in the house the whole evening. Francis went to bathe by himself." "He might have employed others to carry out his plans. John Kempion, you say, lived most of his life in Mexico. Judging from the glimpse I had of his face, I should say he was a trifle wild." "He was a ne'er do weel, as the Scotch say," replied Tormouth dryly, "but he is respectable now." "Then you may be sure he knew a few desperate characters in Mexico who would kidnap the lad for a small sum. One of them dropped that coin. It proves that its owner must have come straight from Mexico. Such coinage is not common in England, and so recent a one as that could not have got there by any other means." "It might be so," said the old lord doubtfully, "but surely John Kempion would not be such a scoundrel as to kidnap his own nephew." "£8,000 a year is worth a crime," said I, smiling. "If he did so, the priest helped him. I won't give up my idea about the Jesuit. He wanted a Catholic head to the family." "Very likely Father Condy favoured the idea," I replied, "but I think John Kempion was the active party." "And what do you propose to do?" "Go to Mexico and make inquiries about John Kempion. If he employed some Mexican desperado to kidnap Francis, the lad must have been taken out there. No safer plan could be discovered, beyond all law and order, without the pale of civilization. Depend upon it, my lord, Francis Kempion is to be found in Mexico." "Then go at once," cried Lord Tormouth radiantly. "Draw on me for what moneys you like. Start by the next boat, and spare nothing to find the lad." Within a fortnight of this conversation I was on my way to Mexico. There's no necessity to relate my wanderings in detail. They would spin out into 3 volumes, and I have neither time nor space at command. So far as relates to John Kempion, I struck his trail at Vera Cruz, followed it to Zacatecas, and finished it at San Francisco. Thenceforward all was known to me, as Lord Tormouth had related how Kempion, a guileless cattle dealer, had left the Golden Gate for the rocky Devon coast. He did not narrate the Mexican history of the man. I found that out for myself. It was a black record. I no longer wondered at the shadow on Kempion's face. A man with a past such as his must have lived in perpetual fear of unwelcome visitors turning up to spoil his respectability. Damocles was more comfortable under his hair-suspended sword. In 6 months I was back in London, with a closely written pocket-book relative to the career of John Kempion. The accidental dropping of the silver coin proved a bad business for him. I remained in London to transact some necessary matters, then I went west to report to Lord Tormouth. Before I related my story, I asked him what had transpired at Kempion Hall since my departure. His information astonished me. "I have not been away since you left Devonshire," said he, "as I was determined to keep a watch on Kempion and the Jesuit. In one way and another, I learned all that was going on. It did not require much ferreting out, as the scandal is now patent to the whole neighbourhood." What scandal? Touching La Senora and a black countryman of hers, Don Miguel Pedroche. Whew! I whistled. So he is here. Do you know him? Only too well. So does John Kempion. Ah, said Tormouth reflectively, probably that is why he is afraid to kick Pedroche out of the house. What? Is he staying at the Hall? I should just think so, much to the wrath of Father Condy. The priest can manage Kempion, but not La Senora and her friend. Oh, it is a most reputable affair, I assure you, sir. Lord Tormouth tapped his snuff-box, revived himself with a pinch, and continued the story. It fitted in very neatly with what I already knew of Kempion and Pedroche. Scarcely had you departed, said his lordship, when this Spanish fellow came to the Hall and quartered himself there. Neither Kempion nor Father Condy were very pleased to see him, but the Senora made amends for the coldness of their reception. Egad, she'd have had him to stay with her at the Dower House but for the priest's influence. I have seen the fellow, sir, continued Tormouth in a tone of disgust. I have seen the fellow kiss La Senora while they walked together on the beach. Scandalous, most scandalous. Is he her lover, think you? I believe so. The minx is not in love with John Kempion, as I thought. She is a fool if she marries this Spanish pauper, though, to be sure, added Tormouth thoughtfully, Kempion will have to support the pair of them. They know too much for his comfort, that's certain. Well, I am not so sure of the lady, said I, but certainly Pedroche knows about the kidnapping of Francis. Egad, you don't say so. I do, and more. I say that he kidnapped the boy. Spanish scoundrel, muttered my lord, at the instigation of Father Condy, no doubt? No, at the instigation of John Kempion. What? Said Tormouth angrily. Do you mean to tell me, sir, that the man was iniquitous enough to kidnap his own nephew? That's so, my lord. This coin, this Mexican peso, dropped accidentally on the beach, was the property of Don Miguel. Has he been in these parts before? He was on the beach the night Francis disappeared. How did he get there? He came in a yacht belonging to John Kempion. Didn't know the man had a yacht. Didn't know the man had a sixpence. In Mexico he had a good many sixpences, I said. Oh, I could tell you some strange facts about Kempion's career in those parts, but we had better stick to the business at hand. Oh, of course, of course. How did the kidnapping take place? John Kempion, my lord, owned a schooner yacht with which he did business in the Caribbean Sea. What that business was, you may guess. His first mate was this Pedroche. Oh, said Lord Tormouth with rising indignation. These scamps made money and lost money. Business was bad when Kempion heard of his brother's death, so he came home to see if he could not get the estates for himself. Finding there was more law and order in England than in Mexico, he did not care about risking hanging, so he decided to have the lad kidnapped. The scoundrel! Before he left Mexico, he made a present of the schooner to Pedroche, and wrote him a letter instructing him to come to the Devon coast and kidnap Francis. Pedroche made his appearance at Falmouth as a Spanish gentleman travelling for pleasure. If you remember, Kempion went to Plymouth about that time, where Pedroche met him and arranged details. Francis was accustomed to swim in that bay every night during the hot summer months, but he never ventured into the current. Just what I said, exclaimed Tormouth triumphantly. During the day that yacht lay beside Lundy Island and crept shoreward when the night fell. Thus few saw her, and those that did took no notice. No one would think of connecting the disappearance of Francis Kempion with a gentleman's yacht. The rest you can guess, my lord. A boatload of scamps, commanded by Pedroche, concealed themselves in the woods fringing the bay. When Francis was in the water, they seized and carried him to Mexico. It was during the scuffle that Pedroche dropped the coin which led to his undoing. Who told you all this, sir? Asked Tormouth, much agitated. I gathered it from various sources, but principally from this gentleman. I opened the door while speaking, and the next moment Francis Kempion was in the old man's arms. Lord Tormouth prides himself on his self-control, but he broke down altogether at this point. I felt rather queer myself. "You look first-rate, lad," he said, holding Francis at arm's length. "They didn't treat you badly?" "Not during the voyage," replied Francis. "Pedroche was very kind, but they held me prisoner at Chihuahua, and I had rather a bad time of it there. Fortunately, this gentleman found me out and rescued me from their clutches. He wouldn't if Pedroche had been there." "Pedroche had gone to England, I suppose, to make love to La Senora?" "Not quite that," I said significantly. "He is her brother." "You don't say so," said Tormouth, genuinely astonished. "Then why is Kempion jealous?" "Oh, he is not jealous, but enraged. The Spaniard, no doubt, conducts himself insolently, and having Kempion in his power, he can do what he likes." "The biter bit," remarked Tormouth with a rap at his snuff-box. "By the way, Francis, do you think La Senora is mixed up in this nefarious transaction?" "I am sure she is not," said the lad earnestly. "She was very fond of me, and behaved most kindly. My uncle alone is to blame." "So it is not the priest after all," observed the old lord irritably. "I made sure the Jesuit had something to do with it. Well, well, we will go over to morrow and take back the rightful heir." There was a highly dramatic performance at Kempion Hall next day. Lord Tormouth arranged the details. Francis was to appear at a given moment and startle Kempion in the midst of his lies. When we entered the hall, the young man pulled his slouch hat over his eyes so as not to be recognized by the servants. He need not have troubled. The present staff were strangers, as Kempion had changed them during his occupancy. None of the old retainers approved of the existing state of things. It was true that John Kempion resided at the Hall, and La Senora dwelt in the Dower House, 2 miles away, but the pair were always together, constituting a scandal to their simple minds. The probability of a marriage struck them as iniquitous. Father Conde thought so too, and had frightened Kempion into acquiescence for the time being. Much as it pleased the Jesuit to have a Catholic landowner under his thumb, he had anything but a pleasant time in keeping matters respectable. The butler announced myself and Lord Tormouth. Francis we left on the other side of the drawing-room door, for production when necessary. Rather startled by the unexpected appearance of his enemy, Kempion arose to his feet, but La Senora and Pedroche, who were also present, exhibited no surprise. They knew nothing of Lord Tormouth's enmity to speak of, and received him as they would have any other visitor. Both were smoking cigarettes, much to the disgust of the punctilious old nobleman. "Mother of God!" said La Senora, removing her cigarette, "and who is this?" She spoke English very well, and so did her brother. They found the knowledge of tongues useful in conducting shady transactions. I have no doubt, with that pretty foreign lisp, La Senora had talked her way into the foolish heart of James Kempion. "Lord Tormouth," said Kempion, looking very pale, as well he might, for he guessed what was coming, "why do you enter my house uninvited?" "I wish to speak seriously with you, Mr. Kempion, and also I desire to avoid scandal." "Scandal, my lord? That is an ugly word." "I know of an uglier," retorted Tormouth, whipping out his snuff-box. "Kidnapping." Pedroche and La Senora glanced significantly at each other, but Kempion reddened with anger. None of the family could keep their temper after provocation. "You have been looking into my life in Mexico," said he with a harsh laugh. "Plenty of kidnapping there, no doubt, but what has that to do with England?" "I am not alluding to Mexico, or to your villainies there, sir. I refer to the loss of your nephew, Francis Kempion." "He was drowned." "Ah, poor child!" sobbed La Senora noisily. "He was drowned." Pedroche laughed, and she glanced fiercely at him out of the corner of her eye. "You loved him, Senora?" said Tormouth, turning in her direction. "Yes, I loved him. Oh, God, how I did love him!" "We all loved him," came the voice of Father Conde from some unseen corner. "But he is dead, poor soul. Why do you come here, my lord?" he added, showing himself. "Why do you come here to disturb the peace of this family?" "I don't think there is much peace under this roof," said Lord Tormouth quietly. "But I have no desire to prolong the scene, so—" "Then go," interrupted Condy, "and take with you that spy." This complimentary allusion was directed at me, but I am used to being called names in my profession, and I did not budge an inch. "This spy, as you term him," observed Lord Tormouth, patting my shoulder, "is a detective who has found out your villainy. I allude to you, John Kempion." "What mean you, my lord? I have been a villain, no doubt, but not for your calling. By what right do you—" "By the right of interest in Francis, your nephew." "He is dead," replied Kempion, "drowned off the beach." "Pshaw, sir! Why keep up the farce? He is alive and well." "Alive and well?" echoed the other, with a dazed look. "Don't mock me, sir," said my lord sharply. "You know he is alive, and was kidnapped by your orders." "'Tis a lie." "I appeal to Don Miguel Pedroche." "I also say it is a lie, Senor," replied Miguel. "By all the saints, I saw not the boy in all my life." "Yet he took a voyage with you to Mexico," said I. Pedroche looked surprised at my knowledge, but said nothing. "I did not have my nephew kidnapped," cried Kempion fiercely. "I have been a bad enough man in my time, but of this charge I am innocent. I loved my brother and my nephew, and I would have raised no hand against either. Why should I harm the lad?" "Because you wanted the property." "I did not want the property. All I wished was to marry Mrs. Kempion here, and return to Mexico. I hate your English life. Had I kidnapped the boy, I would have been by my faith bound to have told Father Condy. Would he have kept silent? Would he, a priest, have countenanced such injustice?" Tormouth muttered something about priests being capable of all things, but was too polite to say so out loud. "You doubtless told Father Condy under the seal of confession," I said. "Therefore, by the rules of his church, he was forced to hold his tongue. Besides," I added significantly, "I have no doubt that Father Condy prefers a Catholic to a Protestant at Kempion Hall." "You wrong me," said the Jesuit in a tone which made me feel mean. "Mr. Kempion made no such confession. Had he done so, I should have found means to have righted the injustice done to the lad, Protestant though he be." "You carry it off bravely, gentlemen," said Tormouth in his most cutting tones, "and had I not proof to the contrary, I might believe you. John Kempion," he added, turning sharply, "I say you kidnapped your nephew, and that Pedroche helped you." "I say you lie," retorted Kempion doggedly. "Would you welcome him back to rob you of your ease?" "Willingly. I take God to witness that the dearest wish of my heart is to see Francis Kempion, my nephew, in his rightful position." All present had risen to their feet. La Senora was pale with terror, Kempion with emotion. The face of Father Condy was set like a mask. Only Pedroche laughed. "You will never see him here," said he. "Holy Mary, no!" In response to a nod from Lord Tormouth, I opened the door. Francis strode into the room and confronted the baffled conspirators. Pedroche cursed in Spanish. His sister shrieked. "Here is the lad himself," said Tormouth. "Now, Kempion." He advanced and took the young man by the hand, so as to assure himself that his nephew was flesh and blood. "Welcome back to your own, Francis," he said at length. "I am glad you have come." "Hypocrite," muttered Tormouth, snapping the lid of his box. "I can hardly believe your speech," said Francis coldly, "seeing it was by your orders I was carried off." "Who told you so?" "Pedroche." The Spaniard tried to get out of the way, but Kempion was too sharp for him, and had his grip on his throat in no time. "You lying Spanish scoundrel," he swore, "own up to the truth, or I'll choke the life out of you. Did I order you to kidnap my nephew?" "No," gasped Pedroche, "no." Kempion hurled him on the floor and faced us manfully. "You see," he said, "I am innocent." "Then who is guilty?" asked Tormouth, perplexed by the train of circumstances. "I am," said La Senora, gliding forward with a look of rage on her face. "Mother of God! Now this cub is back, I have lost all. Yes, I wrote to my brother and asked him to take away this fool. Was I to have but a few £100 while he had thousands? Well, I knew that if he were gone, John would make me his wife, and all the money would be ours. Snake!" she added, turning towards Francis. "Always I hated you, but pretended to love, so that I could oust you from here. John is innocent. I ordered it all. Miguel obeyed me, but now, cursed ones, you gain, and I lose." She rushed out of the room, followed by Father Condy. Evidently she had told all this to the priest at confession, and he did not wish to be questioned about it. His reign was over, as he well knew. "Do you believe me now?" said Kempion. "Yes," said Tormouth and Francis simultaneously. "We believe you." "Then there is nothing more to be said. This reptile has been the bane of my life. He knew too much about my Mexican experiences for me to kick him out of here, but had I guessed his share in this black business, out he should have gone. By all the saints, yes. As to Louisa, she is a woman, and not accountable for her actions. Good-bye." And he strode towards the door. "Where are you going, uncle?" asked Francis, blocking his way. "Back to the woods, lad. In spite of all, I shall marry Louisa, and be friends with yonder scamp. It is my fate. Good-bye, nephew," he said, shaking the hand of Francis. "Do not think too badly of me. Come, Miguel, my brother scamp, let us depart." He caught Miguel by the arm and marched him off. The door closed, and we saw them no more. The two Spaniards and Kempion went back to their own wild life, and no doubt flourished under less rigorous laws. Father Condy went also. With a Protestant at Kempion Hall, he did not care about staying. Once more Francis entered into his heritage, and now that Lord Tormouth looks after him, there is no fear of him being kidnapped a second time. As I was leaving, the old gentleman made a remark. "I am sorry for John Kempion," said he. "There is more good in him than I thought. But had it not been for that Mexican coin, I might have deemed him a villain all my life." Of the reward he gave for finding Francis Kempion, I say nothing. It concerns me more than anyone else. End of Story 6. Story 7 of The Dwarf's Chamber and Other Stories by Fergus Hume. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Story 7, The Rainbow Camellia. Country solicitors have fewer opportunities than their urban brethren of handling exceptional cases. The friction of metropolitan life develops numerous strange episodes which are of rarer occurrence in provincial centres. Human nature is no doubt the same in country as in town, but the lack of a concentrated population, by demanding less ingenuity on the part of the criminal, reduces the level of crime. Moreover, bucolic wits are not so keen as those sharpened by the necessities of London life. Agrarian wrongdoers are usually commonplace rogues, who sin in a crude fashion unworthy of notice. Crime, which in the capital is a fine art, is in the country commonly the result of a childish outburst of temper. These remarks apply peculiarly to the inhabitants of inland market towns, and to the rural population of their intervening pasturelands. Yet at times a case not easily to be paralleled even in the metropolis comes under the notice of a country solicitor. Such a one is that of the Rainbow Camellia, which is, to my mind, unique in the annals of crime. It was simply a case of theft, but sufficiently noticeable for the skilful way in which it was planned and executed. My first intimation of the affair came from my wife, who one morning entered the breakfast-room with a face expressive of consternation. "Fred," said she, in an awestruck tone, "do you remember Eliza Drupp, the housemaid who left 6 months ago?" "Was that the red-haired minx who smashed our best dinner service, and who carried a bottle of diamond cement in her pocket to mend breakages?" "Yes, she has been arrested." "I'm not surprised. Whose dinner service is it this time?" "Don't jest, Fred. I am very sorry for the poor girl, though she has been stealing. Cook told me all about it. She is so excited." "Who is excited, Cook or Eliza?" "Cook, of course." "Then the dinner won't be fit to eat. I wish Cook would gossip less and attend more to her stewing and frying. Give me my breakfast, Nell. I must be off early this morning. Well," I added, as my wife poured out the coffee, "and what has Eliza Drupp been stealing?" "The rainbow camellia." "What, the whole plant?" "No, only a bud. She went into the gardens yesterday and picked it." "Audacious creature! She'll get 6 months for that. Old Bendel is on the bench, and as he is a prominent member of the Horticultural Society, Eliza need expect no mercy." "I don't know what possessed her to do such a thing," said Nell reflectively. "And the worst of it is that George Beanfield gave information about the theft." "Who is George Beanfield, and why shouldn't he give information?" "Because he kept company with her. It is a piece of spite on his part to punish Eliza for taking up with the greengrocer." "I congratulate you on your knowledge of kitchen gossip, Nell. But you have not answered my question. Who is George Beanfield?" "A gardener in the service of the Horticultural Society. I suppose he will be the principal witness against poor Eliza. How can a man be so mean?" "A man scorned is as dangerous as a woman scorned, my dear. Eliza should not have walked out with the greengrocer. By the way, was George the man who used to hide in the coal cellar?" "No, that was a soldier." "Oh, then he was the Gargantua who devoured all the cold meat." "Don't talk nonsense, Fred. Go to your office, and if you hear anything of the case, tell me when you come home. I am so sorry for poor Eliza." This was very charitable on the part of Nell. So far as I could remember, Eliza Drupp had been a sore trial, and I had frequently heard my wife express a hope that the Drupp sins would come home to the Drupp sinner. Now that they had come in the most satisfactory manner, she regretted the accomplishment of her wishes, and pitied the recreant Eliza. I did not. It was impossible to pity a girl who had cost me over £20 in breakages. When I reached my office, I received a message from Eliza requesting me to step round to her cell and discuss the matter. As fish did not come to my net in sufficient quantities to make me despise even such small fry as Eliza, I accepted the invitation, and speedily found myself in the presence of my former housemaid. She was to be brought before Bendel that very morning, so there was no time to be lost in learning what defence she proposed to make. To judge of the heinousness of Eliza's offence, it is necessary to state that the Horticultural Society of Foxton is the sole owner of the famous rainbow camellia. That unique plant had been brought from China many years ago by a vagrant Foxtonian, and it was the only one in existence on this side of the world. The Foxton Society prided itself on the possession of this rarity, the more so as such possession excited the envy of all rival societies. Of these, many had attempted to beg, borrow, buy, or steal slips of the plant, in order to raise rainbow camellias on their own account. But hitherto not one had secured even a single bud. It was reserved for Eliza to commit that crime. The blossom was streaked with the 7 colours of the rainbow, hence its name, and as a further priceless qualification, it emitted a distinct odour. Now, as, with this exception, a scented camellia is absolutely unknown, it was only natural that the Foxton horticulturists should set a high value on their ownership. I thought myself that their enthusiasm was exaggerated, as the prosperity of Foxton did not entirely depend on the possession of that striped and scented flower, but then I am not a flower fancier, and I cannot appreciate the passions of horticulturists. Those of Foxton were quite offensive in their pride. If Eliza Drupp had stolen the crown jewels, the theft would have been a mere venial transgression, but that she should call a single bud of the rainbow camellia placed her beyond the pale of ordinary sinners. Eliza was tearful but voluble. She had been born within sound of Bow Bells, and talked with a strong Cockney accent, which became more marked with increasing agitation. How this child of the London pavement had drifted to Foxton I do not know, but she had served as housemaid in various houses for the last 4 years, and was accustomed, when out of a situation, which happened frequently on account of her destructive propensities, to visit her parents at Hackney. Her town graces and brazen good looks (our cook said they were brazen) attracted many admiring swains. The vengeful George was one of these, but Eliza had jilted him in favour of the more opulent greengrocer. Nemesis, in the person of the deserted gardener, was now punishing her for such perfidy. "How's he treated me shameful," said the tearful Eliza, "just because I wouldn't take him, and he shows me up like this." "If you play with fire, Eliza, you burn your fingers as a natural consequence. But this is not the point. Have you any defence to this charge?" "I should say so, sir. 'Tain't true as I stole that measly Camellia, or it was my own." "Come now, that's nonsense. The Foxton Rainbow Camellia is the only one of its kind in England." "'Tain't the only one in the world, anyhow, sir," retorted Eliza with some heat. "I've a Rainbow Camellia at Hackney. If you won't believe me, just send to my father and see." "Do you mean to say that you possess a plant of the same species?" I asked, rather astonished at this information. "Course I do, sir. My brother, he's a steward, he is. He goes to China in a 3-star line, sir. He bought it to me 4 years ago, from foreign parts, he did." "And the flower you wore was off your own bush?" "Yes. I kim here yesterday from Hackney, and I brought it with me, just to see if mine would like this one here." "Did you wear it when you entered the gardens?" "No, sir. I had it in a paper bag, and when I was in the greenhouse I takes it out. When I thought it were the same, I pens it on my dress. Then that bloomin' gunner collared me. Do you see, sir?" "I see. But how is it that a blossom is missing from the tree?" "I don't know, sir. 'Twant me that took it, sir. You just telegraph to my father at Hackney and ask him to bring down my Camellia, sir." "Yes, I'll do that, but as he cannot be down in time for the case to-day, I'll ask for a remand, so that I may ascertain the truth of your story." "Thank you, sir. Am I to stay here, sir?" "I hope not. I will be security for your bail myself." "That is handsome on yer, sir. And if you sees that there George Beanfield, sir, just tell him as how I'll scratch his eye out his head." There was no necessity for me to deliver this agreeable message. She did so herself when brought before the magistrate. Beanfield seemed to appreciate the situation, and to congratulate himself that Eliza was restrained from violence by 2 stout policemen. As long as possible he remained modestly in the background, and it was with manifest reluctance that he came forward when called upon to enter the witness box. The lady in the dock glared at him with a mixture of scorn and rage, and again proclaimed her determination to "scratch his eyes out." When ordered to be silent, she relapsed into tears, and said she was being put upon. I had heard her make this remark before, when gently corrected for breaking 3 plates in succession. The court was filled with infuriated members of the Horticultural Society, who wished Eliza to be forthwith hanged and quartered. It was commonly reported that my client had not only picked the flower, but had also stolen a slip of the plant, which she designed to sell to a rival society. Believing that Eliza thus intended to rob Foxton of the glory of solely possessing the Rainbow Camellia, the horticulturists thought no punishment too severe for so abandoned a creature. I applied for a remand, which old Bendel, who was a rabid member of the society, was disposed to refuse. I pointed out that, in the interests of justice, the prisoner should be granted sufficient time to communicate with her friends, and prove herself innocent of the charge. Bendel did not believe she had a defence, and said as much, but after considerable argument I managed to obtain an adjournment for 3 days. In the matter of bail I was unsuccessful, as the magistrate declined to allow Eliza to be at large until the matter had been legally threshed out. He was supported in this decision by his angered confrères, who had already judged and condemned the delinquent housemaid. The ultimate outcome of my application was the removal of Eliza to her former captivity. When instructing the parental Drupp by letter as to the misfortune which had befallen his daughter, I suggested that to clear her character he should forthwith bring with him to Foxton the Hackney Camellia. As to the existence of this plant, I had my doubts, expecting that Eliza had mistaken the variegated, scentless camellia for the unique plant of Foxton. But the bush brought by Drupp proved to be of the same genus. It was streaked with 7 colours, it was scented, and, as a proof that Eliza was innocent, it still bore the stem whence the bud, alleged to have been stolen from the Foxton greenhouse, had been reft. Her story thus proved to be true, but I thought it strange that at such a juncture a blossom should also be missing from our local plant. The coincidence was peculiar, the inference doubtful. "My daughter growed this year," explained Drupp, who was quite as cockney in speech as Eliza. "It was brought from Chiner by my son Sam, as is a steward on the Mendeloi. Says 'Liza to me other day, 'I'll just take a flower to Foxton and see if that camellia is the same as mine.' Which she did, and now they've put her in quod. I hope so as how she'll get her orf." With so clear a defence, I thought it extremely probable that they would let her off, but as old Bendel was on the bench, I knew the fight would be a tough one. Had Eliza worn the bud when she entered the gardens, her innocence would have been proved beyond all doubt. Still, as the matter stood, I had every hope of clearing her character. When Eliza was again placed in the dock, the court was even more crowded than on the former occasion. A rumour had originated, I know not how, that a plant similar to that owned by the Society would be put in evidence by the defence. As in duty bound, no horticulturist believed this fable. As well say there were 2 Queens of England as 2 rainbow camellias. The Foxton plant was displayed in all its glory, and, lost in admiration, the onlookers exclaimed that there was none like unto it. This biblical exclamation is suitable to the scene, for the plant might have been the golden image of Nebuchadnezzar, so abjectly did its worshippers grovel before it. The mere sight of the missing bud roused them to wrathful denunciations against the ravisher. When brought before the magistrate, Eliza wept loudly, but on the appearance of George in the witness box she recovered her spirits and called him names. Then she again relapsed into tears, and sniffed provokingly during the subsequent proceedings. Beanfield deposed that Eliza was not wearing the flower when she entered the gardens, but he admitted that she had carried a paper bag, which he feebly conjectured to contain biscuits. He had exchanged no words with her, as they were not on friendly terms, but he declared that she had made a face at him, and had derisively put out her tongue. When he saw her again, the bud, produced in court, was fastened in the bosom of her dress. He at once inspected the rainbow camellia, and found a blossom missing, upon which evidence he had given Eliza in charge for theft. Another gardener proved that no buds were wanting when he saw the plant half an hour before Eliza's visit. He was followed by the president of the Horticultural Society, who stated that outside China, to which the species was indigenous, there was no rainbow camellia in existence. The bud produced in court could only have been taken from the Foxton greenhouse. His assertion of the uniqueness of the plant was received with great applause by his fellow horticulturists. Their jaws dropped when old Drupp brought forward Eliza's specimen. At first they insisted that the petals were painted, but when, by direction of old Bendel, the plant was handed round and handled and smelt and thoroughly examined, they were reluctantly compelled to admit that it was a genuine rainbow camellia. The admission almost drew tears from their eyes, and they mourned Ichabod, Ichabod. The 2 plants, placed on either side of the magistrate, appeared to closely resemble one another, save that Eliza's was the smaller of the 2. I forgot to mention that the Hackney plant had 8 buds, while the Foxton plant showed 12. As a blossom had been plucked from each, These were respectively reduced to 7 and 11. Drupp's evidence in conjunction with the production of the plant turned the scale in favour of Eliza. It was all plain sailing when he opened his mouth. The plant belonged to his daughter. It had been brought from China by her brother, the steward. Under her care it had grown and flowered, and she had plucked a bud to compare with the blooms of the Foxton bush. No link was wanting in the chain of evidence to prove the innocence of the prisoner, and Bendel was reluctantly compelled to discharge her without a stain on her character. I say reluctantly because he could not forgive Eliza for owning a duplicate of the Foxton fetish, and taking every possible advantage, he delivered a smart lecture to its iniquitous possessor. There was no applause when Eliza left the dock. Restored to freedom, she sought George Beanfield, but he, mindful of her threat, had departed long since. He left the town, he even left the country, for a letter addressed from the Continent was received by the president of the society, which cleared up the mystery of the missing Foxton bud. George stated that in attending to the plant he had accidentally knocked off a blossom, and, fearful of a reprimand, had burnt it in the greenhouse fire. The appearance of Eliza with a similar bud to that destroyed had afforded him an opportunity of hiding his delinquency by making her the scapegoat. He did not offer any opinion as to how he thought Eliza had become possessed of the blossom when the one missing from the bush had been destroyed by himself. Thus was the innocence of Eliza proved beyond all doubt, and, angered by the unjust aspersions cast on her, she proceeded forthwith to turn the tables on her accusers. The morning following her acquittal she appeared in my office with a wrathful countenance. "Now, sir," said she viciously, "I'm a-going to hev a action agin them Giddens for locking me up." But the action never came off. The society, knowing it had no defence, owned that it was in the wrong, and offered to compromise. Moreover, they feared lest Eliza should sell her plant to a rival society, and thus rob Foxton of the glory of solely possessing the rainbow camellia. After some correspondence, they agreed to settle the action for £500, provided Eliza gave them her plant. This she did, and having received her damages, and paid my fees, she disappeared from Foxton. A month afterwards my wife again brought up the subject of Eliza Drupp. As usual, the cook was her informant. "Fred," said she, "Eliza Drupp." "Well, what has she been doing now? Stolen another camellia?" "No, she has married George Beanfield." "The fellow who gave evidence against her?" "Impossible." "It is true. Cook has this morning received a piece of the wedding cake." "Well, all I can say is, that Eliza is of a most forgiving disposition." "I have no patience with her," replied my wife, "but I think she is ashamed to return to Foxton. She and George have gone to South America." "A very sensible step to take," said I, weary of the subject. "They can set up on the proceeds of the trial. At all events, we have heard the last of Eliza Drupp." The remark was premature, for in less than 12 months I was again discussing Eliza, and learning the reason of her eccentric behaviour. It was on board the Mandalay that I heard the truth concerning the matrimonial alliance of our former housemaid. I was ordered to take a sea voyage for the benefit of my health, and as Nell refused to come on the plea of being a bad sailor, I was obliged to make the journey alone. One place was much the same as another to me, provided the instructions of my physician were carried out. So, taking the first chance that presented itself, I embarked for China on a 3-star liner. The ship was comfortable, the passengers sociable, and the table excellent, so the voyage promised to be very pleasant. As a description thereof is not pertinent to the story, I proceed at once to the episode which brought up again the name of Eliza Drupp. Among the stewards figured a red-haired creature, freckled and stumpy. He was neither my table nor berth attendant, yet he never failed when by accident I caught his eye to salute me with a knowing grin. This mark of recognition led me to examine him closely in the expectation of finding a former client or servant. I could not recall his features, yet they seemed to be familiar to me. We were in the Bay of Biscay when I spoke to him. The ship was rolling heavily, and on my way to lie down in my cabin I met with my red-polled friend. He smiled as usual, whereupon I asked him if he knew me. "No, sir," said he with a grin, "but Lizer knows you, sir." "Lizer?" "My sister, sir. Lizer Drupp as was." "And that accounts for the familiar look of your face. You are her brother Sam." "Yes, sir. Shall I help you along to your bunk, sir?" "If you please." By this unexpected meeting the circumstances of the case recurred to my mind, and I was pleased to meet with Sam. It was he who had brought the camellia to Eliza, and I wished to learn where he procured it, and also why his sister had married her enemy. Sam was not unlike my former client, but owing to his vocation he had a less pronounced Cockney accent. At times, however, the Londoner peeped out. "How is Eliza?" I asked, when safely bestowed in my bunk. "And where is Eliza?" "In Paraguay, with her husband, sir. There's as happy as the day is long." "That is rather curious, Drupp, considering her husband was a witness in that case of—" Sam interrupted me at this moment by laughing violently. I checked his untoward mirth with a frown, whereupon he wiped his eyes and apologized. "'Scuse me, sir, but I can't help laughin' when I think of that there case. You got Lizer 5 run red, you did, sir, and she and George have bought a ranch in Paraguay and are getting on fine. Ron Orye is now, sir, and Lizer's quite delighted." "Her bad luck was the cause of her good luck," said I epigrammatically. "It was a fortunate thing for Eliza that you brought her that rainbow camellia from China." Sam grinned and again apologized. "Bless you, sir, I didn't bring her no camellia fra China, sir." "Then how did Eliza become possessed of the second plant?" "George, sir. He got her a clip off the Foxton plant." "George?" repeated I in amazement. "But he gave evidence against her. If he got her the slip he must have known that." "Course he did, sir. It was all ploy acting. Lizer wrote home and told all about it." "Then you can tell me all about it, Drupp. As I conducted the case, I should like to hear the sequel. It may explain why Eliza married Beanfield." "That it do, sir," said Sam, grinning. "It were this why, sir. Liza 'ad no money, and George 'adn't enough to marry on. They wanted to get spliced, and so it on to plan to get money. Liza, she was reading about a cove as got £1,000 for being put in quod when he was innercent. So she says to George, 'Can't we try the sime game and get enough to marry on?' And George, sir, 'ad an idear. He's a long-headed chap, sir, for being a gardener to Foxton society, and knew what a lot they thought of that blessed camellia. So he steals a slip and tells Eliza to make it grow, and to tell father as I brought it fra China. She asked me to say so, and not knowing her game, I said so. But I never knowed anything about it, sir. Then Liza makes it grow as George says, though 'twas a long time growing. When the flowers come, she takes one to Foxton and walks into the greenhouse and—" "I see. It was all arranged between them, so as to sue the society and get damages." "Yes, sir. George nipped off a bud and burnt it, he did. Then Liza, wearing her own, comes out and puts her in quod." "And between the two of them they clear £500. "Yes, sir, and then he marries her. Do you see, sir?" "I see, Drupp, and I must say they are a nice pair." "That they are, sir, and I'd ha' spilt their game, had I known it." After delivering this opinion, Drupp departed, and I was left to ruminate over his story. I quite believed that he was ignorant of the plot, but I was satisfied that had he known he would only have held his tongue if well paid. It was useless to give the benefit of the doubt to one who was of the same stock as Eliza. That artful girl knew her family too well to entrust them with her secret, and less legal expenses, she and her fellow conspirator got the whole of the damages to themselves. Much as I condemned their rascality, I could not but admire the cleverness with which they had planned and carried out their scheme. They had deceived Drupp, they had deceived the society, they had deceived me. Their comedy was extremely well acted, and ended quite to their satisfaction. Whereupon I say that country wits are at times equal to those of town-bred folks, for though the idea was Eliza's, the conception and execution of the scheme emanated from the bucolic brain of George. I told the whole story to my wife when I returned home, and she was very severe on her former housemaid. Naturally enough, she could not keep it to herself, and in a short time the history of the deception soon became town talk. At first, the members of the Horticultural Society were angered at being so treated, but as the delinquents were in South America, it was wisely concluded to let the matter drop. They possessed both rainbow camellias, and, warned by the trickery of George and Eliza, watched the plants with renewed vigilance. I do not think that any one else will have the chance of stealing a slip of the Foxton fetish, but should a third rainbow camellia make its appearance in the market, old Bendel is quite resolved not to be hoodwinked a second time. He often regrets that he did not give Eliza 6 months, but is too late now, as the conspirators are farming in Paraguay. They ought to rear a rainbow camellia, if only to remind them of their iniquity. End of Story 7. Story 8 of The Dwarf's Chamber and Other Stories by Fergus Hume. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Story 8, The Ivory Leg and the 24 Diamonds. Members of a family may be selfishly proud of their individual perfections, yet take a collective pride in some special attribute or possession of their race. The O'Grady's, for instance, flatter themselves on owning a genuine banshee. The McSniffs think highly of the Orry Tower built by Noah McSniff to escape a second flood, and the Fitztudors are proud of their royal descent from a frail ancestress and a dissolute king. Such like trifles give satisfaction to the most aristocratic families, and raise them, in their own estimation, above the commonalty. These do not recognize Adamic relationship otherwise than that they belong to the human race. The Dreuxfields, having made money by army contracting during the Peninsular War, cast round for some fetish to boast of, to expatiate on, and to bore their friends with. They had no ancestors worth talking about, their baronial halls were a recent purchase, and the family ghost of the former proprietors, not being a fixture, had passed away with the ancient stock. Ultimately, they hit on jewels as the most respectable thing to be proud of, and in pursuance of the idea, they acquired 24 diamonds, the like of which had never been seen since Aladdin looted the cave of the lamp. These were not all bought at once, or by one person. Such wholesale buying would have reduced the whole affair to the level of a Bond Street purchase. The collecting of these gems took time and money, and possibly the loss of immortal souls. For the last 50 years, every member of the family who could beg, borrow, buy, or steal a particularly fine diamond would forthwith contribute the same to the Dreuxfield fetish. Each jewel, worth no end of money, had a history, reputable or otherwise, and finally 24 gems of the first water were brought together to constitute the heirloom of the Dreuxfields. The fetish ever consisted of these 24 diamonds, but the stones varied in the setting according to the taste of the Mrs. Dreuxfield then in possession. They glittered a tiara for display at St. James's, or flared a jewelled belt for a waist. Sometimes they separated into bracelets of 12 gems each, or again collected into a necklace shooting 24 sparks of fire. In this latter form they were now, as the present Mrs. Dreuxfield's fine neck and shoulders formed an admirable background for the display of their splendour. Experts valued the necklace at £20,000, and it fully justified in worth and appearance the pride of its possessors. All the thieves in London had seen those diamonds, going to court on the fair neck of Mrs. Dreuxfield, and had calculated the chances of getting them into their clutches. They never found an opportunity of stealing them, however, as when not in use they reposed in the strong room of Dreuxfield Hall, Malvern, the key of which was attached to the squire's watch chain. Yet, notwithstanding the impossibility of a successful raid, one famous cracksman swore loudly that he would yet steal the jewels. So far he had not succeeded. His name was Cracky Bill of Whitechapel, and he was wanted by the police. Cecil Dreuxfield, who had lately succeeded to the property, was a young man of 30 whose parents, dying within a year of each other, had left him and his wife in possession of the Hall and the diamonds. With them lived Cecil's sister, Kate, and Mrs. Dreuxfield's uncle, Josiah Onslow. The young couple were handsome and agreeable. The sister was a pretty girl fond of the curate, and the uncle a bad-tempered ancient who owned an ivory leg. This latter curiosity deserves a special mention. It is not every man who possesses an artificial limb made of ivory, and the Major — he had retired from service of the 2nd E.I.C. with that rank — was as proud of it as was Pelops of his ivory shoulder. Not born a Dreuxfield, he took no especial interest in the necklace, and bestowed all superfluous pride on his ivory leg. Onslow had imagination, and should have been a novelist. As it was, he told stories about that leg which outvied the Arabian Nights. There were 50 distinct narratives as to how he had lost his limb and gained the artificial understanding. He never repeated himself, and lied like a journalist short of news. The leg was turned like that of a pianoforte, and carved out of all smoothness. If anyone asked him if it was vegetable ivory, he threw everything handy at the head of the inquirer. "Vegetable ivory, you qualified fool!" he would roar. "No, genuine ivory, elephant's tusks, bless me! The Rajah of Dum gave me the leg for losing my own in killing a heavenly elephant that, blessed, nearly killed him." The adjectives in this speech must be read contrariwise. Onslow was not a nice man, and no great favourite with the young trio. He drank sherry, which was bad for his liver, and played cards for stakes ruinous to his meagre purse. Only the love Dreuxfield had for his wife prevented him turning her relation out of doors. By dint of much self-control, they put up fairly well with his tantrums, and were glad when he visited London, which he did twice or thrice a month, to lose money at his favourite pastime. No one loved the old reprobate, not even his servant, whom he bullied unmercifully. Perhaps the present valet had not been long enough in his situation to love the Major, for he was a new importation. Onslow rarely kept his men longer than a month. The incessant exercise of dodging missiles wore them thin. The new valet fared better, as he was deferential, and had been an attendant in a lunatic asylum. Moreover, he took a great interest in the Major's ivory leg, and when it was unstrapped at night, he always carried it to his own room to polish up for the morning. These little attentions pleased the crusty old man. One evening in April the curate came to dinner. He was a handsome, earnest young fellow, much in love with Kate Dreuxfield. His affection was returned, and it seemed probable that there would be a match. Everyone favoured the idea, save Major Onslow, who hated the curate like poison. All the scandal he could gather about the parson he repeated to Cecil, but as he had discounted his veracity by ivory leg stories, this gossip merely provoked distrust. After dinner the curate followed Kate into the drawing-room, where he made love, with the consent and in the presence of Mrs. Dreuxfield. Cecil, left alone with Onslow, drank his wine, smoked his cigar, and listened to the Major raging. He was particularly offensive this evening, and his speeches need expurgation. "I hate that sneaking parson," he began without preamble. Dreuxfield interrupted him smartly. "You are in the minority, then. Jenny, Kate, and myself think no end of him." "Particularly Kate," sneered the Major. "I suppose she will marry the fellow." "If by the fellow you mean Clarence Newell, I have no doubt she will," retorted Cecil pointedly. "I know of no man to whom I would so willingly give my sister." "I thought you didn't like parsons." "Then you thought wrong, sir. I am not aware of having manifested any particular dislike to the Church. Besides, I was at college with Newell, and I know him to be a good, honest fellow." "I've heard different stories," said Onslow, enraged by these contradictions. "It is said that Newell is in a fast set." "Maybe, but he was not fast himself. You are thinking of his cousin, Clive Newell. The initials are the same. The natures are not." "You believe in him, I see," said the Major huffily, making for the door. "But mark my words, he'll sell you yet. I never knew a parson that didn't." "Newell is quite sound, Major. As sound as that ivory leg you—" His speech was interrupted by the banging of the door. Onslow did not like his leg being made a jest of, and, moreover, finding he was getting the worst of it, he retired to bed. By no means sorry to see the back of this cantankerous elder, Cecil finished his claret and went to the drawing-room. Here he found the two ladies and Newell in eager conversation. "The Major has gone to bed, Jenny," he said to his wife. "Lost his temper, as usual." "What a cross old man he is," said Mrs. Dreuxfield, shrugging her shoulders. "Cecil, dear, I hope he has not vexed you. I really think we ought to take away his ivory leg until he promises to behave better." "Never mind, Jenny," whispered Kate. "He is going to town to morrow, and will be away some days." "You look tired, Newell," said Dreuxfield, patting his friend on the shoulder. "I have been busy lately," answered the curate, "and besides, I'm rather worried over a family matter." "That scamp Clive again?" asked Cecil in a low voice. Newell nodded, and would have continued speaking, but that Kate interposed. "What are you two talking about?" she said. Then, without waiting for an answer, added, "Oh, Cecil, I want you to show Mr. Newell the necklace. He has never seen it, and you promised me this morning at breakfast to bring it out." "Come to the next drawing-room, Mr. Newell," said Mrs. Dreuxfield amiably, "and you shall see it on my neck." "I think he would like a closer inspection," laughed Cecil. "I'll fetch it down here." "Do," said Newell eagerly. "You have no idea how anxious I am to see the Dreuxfield diamonds." "What a curious odour," observed Dreuxfield, sniffing. "You haven't any drugs in your pockets, have you, Newell?" "Not that I know of," replied the curate, smiling. "But I was taking some medicine to a parishioner to day, and the cork came out of the bottle. No doubt some of the contents were spilt." "Oh, that is it. You ought to be more careful. I declare you scent the room like a perambulating drug shop. Sweet, heavy, sickly. Chloroform," finished Cecil, and departed for the strong-room. It seemed to Kate, who was watching his face, that her lover paled a trifle at this last remark. The momentary emotion passed, but she thought it strange. Then they fell to talking of the necklace and its worth. "I declare," said Mrs. Dreuxfield, with a pretty shudder, "that I am always nervous when going to the drawing-room. To sit in a carriage with hundreds of curious eyes fastened on those diamonds is enough to shake stronger nerves than mine." "I don't see why you should fear, Jenny. No one can steal that necklace. It is too well guarded." "Let us hope no one will attempt so daring a theft. Ah, here comes Dreuxfield with the jewels." Cecil placed the morocco box on the table and lifted the lid. In the lamplight a glory streamed from the 24 gems. Even the two women, well accustomed to the sight, could not restrain a little cry of delighted surprise. Newell drew a long breath and gazed steadfastly at the glitter before him. The stones, but slightly set and connected, flashed a circle of sunbeams. "A king's ransom," he said, and turned away as if to shut out the too fascinating sight. They amused themselves with the necklace for some time, and then closed the box. It was left on the table. Shortly afterwards the ladies retired to bed, and Newell went up to the smoking-room with Dreuxfield. Hardly were they outside the drawing-room door when Cecil uttered an ejaculation of annoyance. "What a fool I am!" said he. "I quite forgot the necklace. You know where the smoking-room is, Newell. Just go to it while I replace the diamonds in the strong-room." Newell assented and moved away, while Dreuxfield went back for the necklace. The box was still on the table, and a glance inside assured him that the jewels were safe. Blaming himself for his inconceivable rashness in leaving the treasure even for a moment, he went to the strong-room. It was on the ground floor, and approached by a long and somewhat dark passage. With the case under his arm, Dreuxfield fumbled at the lock of the door, when suddenly an arm was thrown round his neck, choking the cry on his lips. A cloth saturated with chloroform was clapped over his mouth, and he heard the morocco box clatter to the floor as he lost his senses. Mrs. Dreuxfield, in her dressing-room, chattered with Kate about the curate, and playfully bantered her on her chances of becoming a clergyman's wife. Then Kate retired, and Mrs. Dreuxfield prepared for bed. Somewhat astonished at the unusual absence of her husband, she was about to seek the smoking-room and reprove him, when she heard a loud cry. In a few minutes she was downstairs, and found Newell in the hall, bending over the unconscious body of Cecil. "What is the matter?" she cried, alarmed by this spectacle. "I don't know," gasped Newell, with a remarkably pale face. "He left me to put away the jewels. I waited his return in the smoking-room. He did not appear, and I went in search of him. He was lying unconscious by the strong-room door." By the time this breathless explanation came to an end, the whole household thronged the hall. Last of all, the Major, followed by his valet Jenkins, stumped down the stairs, loudly excusing himself for so late an arrival. "Jenkins took my ivory leg to his room to clean," he exclaimed. "I came down the instant it was strapped on. Now what is all this?" Explanations were made. A doctor appeared on the scene, and Cecil sat up confusedly to give his version of the episode. "Chloroform!" exclaimed the doctor. "The diamonds," said Dreuxfield. "I have been robbed." This explanation did not mend matters. The moment before they had been concerned for the safety of their master, now each and all wondered what was the penalty for robbery. Pale servants looked askance at one another, and the female domestics shrieked themselves into hysterics. Kate kept her head and bore Mrs. Dreuxfield to her room, leaving the men to deal with the matter. Unfortunately, at so late an hour, little could be done, so there was nothing left for it but to wait until dawn opened the telegraph office. Newell, finding himself useless in advising and doing, went home in company with the doctor. Cecil and the Major retired to bed, but not to sleep. Few eyes were closed at Dreuxfield Hall that night, and the air was charged with terror and suspicion. The diamond necklace was gone, but no one, least of all its owner, knew who had thieved it so dexterously. The next morning Dreuxfield wired for detectives and called in the local police. I, who tell the story, was deputed to look after the case, and on arriving at Malvern I was put in possession of the facts. From such statements I could not guess who was the thief, and proceeded to examine the servants. The result was unsatisfactory, and I tackled the gentry. Dreuxfield, his wife, and sister could tell me nothing, and altogether the loss of that necklace was as deep a mystery as ever I had to do with. It rather added to my perplexity when I found that Major Onslow and his valet had that morning gone to London. He had explained that he knew a man who would elucidate any mystery better than a professional detective, and was going to fetch him down. Then I inquired after the curate, and Miss Kate produced a hastily scribbled note. "He went to town this morning," she explained, not without embarrassment. "Do you know on what business, Miss Dreuxfield?" "Something connected with a relative," said she, glancing at the note. I must say the conduct of the curate appeared suspicious. Dreuxfield very unwillingly told me of the chloroform episode in the drawing-room. This did not tend to exculpate Newell, so I examined the position of the smoking-room relative to the strong-room. Both were on the ground floor, and it was easy to get from one to the other. I suppose my suspicions showed themselves in my face, for Dreuxfield took me sharply to task. "I know what you're thinking of," said he, "that Mr. Newell did not go to the smoking-room, but when I returned for the jewels, hid himself in the strong-room passage. You are wrong. It is absolutely impossible that he should be the thief." "Yet his clothes were scented with chloroform, and by that drug you were rendered senseless." "Yes," admitted Dreuxfield reluctantly, "but that proves nothing." "Nothing? Save that he must have had chloroform on him yesterday. Rather a curious drug for a person to carry. Then he went to London this morning. That looks suspicious." "I suppose you'll say he took the necklace with him?" "It's not impossible." "I have known Newell for many years," said Dreuxfield earnestly, "and I assure you that he is incapable of such an act." His sister, who had overheard our conversation, withered me with a glance. "Mr. Newell is a gentleman and a clergyman," she declared indignantly. "I would as soon think of suspecting my brother as him. To morrow he returns, and he will face the charge you have brought against him." "I have brought no charge against him yet," I answered, and so closed the discussion. Notwithstanding all my efforts, I could discover nothing likely to lead to the arrest of the thief. The servants all asserted their innocence and supported one another strongly after the fashion of their kind. In my own heart I suspected the curate, and waited with some impatience for his arrival. A personal interview would simplify matters. Rather to the dismay of Kate Dreuxfield, he did not return next day, thereby confirming my suspicions. The last train brought the Major full of stories about the curate, none of which redounded to the young man's credit. "Do you know why I went to town, Cecil?" he asked Mr. Dreuxfield in my presence. "To fetch some special detective of your own." "That was merely an excuse to keep Kate quiet." "No, I followed Newell to town." "That is the curate, Major?" said I. "Yes, sir," he answered triumphantly, "that sneaking parson. I suspected he had something to do with the robbery, and I am right." "Do you mean to say that Newell stole the necklace?" asked Dreuxfield, looking very pale. "Yes, I do. I have no positive proof, but strong suspicions." "Those go for nothing." "Wait a moment, Mr. Dreuxfield," I whispered. "Let Major Onslow tell his story." "After the robbery," said the ivory-legged gentleman, "I thought the parson might have had something to do with it, as I neither liked nor trusted him. If my suspicions were correct, I fancied he would go to town next day, so at dawn I sent out to learn his movements. Sure enough, Newell was going to town by the 10 o'clock train, so without saying anything I followed him. Strange to say, he drove from Waterloo to my own lawyer's. I waited until his interview was finished, and then I saw my solicitor. He, of course, refused to reveal anything, but he hinted sufficient for me to know that Newell intended to pay him a large sum of money on that day. I then had no doubt that Newell had stolen the necklace, and was about to raise money on it." "But I don't see—" "Of course you don't," interrupted Onslow, cutting short Dreuxfield's remark. "You believe in the fellow. I don't. I know, and you know, that he hasn't a sixpence, and yet he traffics with lawyers over large sums of money. After that discovery, I left the office and hung about all day." "Most respectable employment," sneered Dreuxfield. "It was in your interest," reproved the Major with dignity. "In the afternoon I saw this wolf in sheep's clothing coming back. While he was with the senior partner, a clerk left the office and took a hansom. I followed in another. He went to the bank and presented a cheque for £3,000. I saw the cheque. It was signed by Newell. Now then," concluded Onslow triumphantly, "where did Newell get that money, if not by pledging the necklace?" Dreuxfield and I made no immediate comment. Things looked fishy for the curate, and his actions fitted in neatly with the suspicion that he was the thief. Meantime I left Onslow to gloat over his perspicuity, and took Dreuxfield aside. "Excuse me, sir," said I, "but I am about to say something rude." "Say away," he answered, looking rather pale. "I won't be offended." "I have examined all the servants, sir, and I am pretty certain that not one of them is clever enough to have carried out this robbery. Suspicions point towards Mr. Newell, yet for the moment let us give him the benefit of the doubt, and see who else could have stolen the jewels. Now if—" Seeing I hesitated, Dreuxfield anticipated my speech. "You are thinking of Major Onslow?" "Well, yes. I hear a good deal of club gossip, and to tell the honest truth, Major Onslow does not bear a good character." "I know all that," said Dreuxfield bitterly. "He is an old rogue who would sell his soul, if he has one, to gratify his vices. Yet I don't think he is the thief. He retired early to bed, and his valet took his ivory leg away. Without that leg he could do nothing." "Suppose his valet didn't take away his master's ivory leg?" "Ah, you think the two of them are in it?" "I can't say. Wait till I see the curate. It seems to me that Major Onslow is suspiciously active in getting evidence against him. At present I should like to see the valet." "Uncle," said Dreuxfield, returning to the old man, "can we see Jenkins?" "He didn't come back with me," replied Onslow gruffly. "I gave him permission to see his relatives." "When do you expect him back?" "In a week. You don't think he stole the necklace, do you?" finished the Major defiantly. "No," said I, shirking the answer, "but I have examined all the servants except your man. It is only fair that he should have his turn." "Wait here for a week and you'll see him," replied the Major ungraciously. "Or go to my London club. He calls there every morning for my letters and sends them on." "I don't trust club servants." "Oh, I shan't trouble so much about him," I said, so our party of three broke up. It was too late that evening to wire, but in the morning I sent a telegram to a brother detective containing instructions to see Jenkins at the club. By noon I received a reply, with which I went in search of the Major. On the way Miss Dreuxfield stopped me. "Mr. Newall is coming down this afternoon," she said, showing me a letter. "He will be here at 4:00. Then your suspicions will be explained away." "I hope so, with all my heart. But I may mention, Miss Dreuxfield, that I brought no specific charge against Mr. Newall." I spoke to the empty air, for by this time she was out of hearing. My hintings had offended her mortally, but no one could have held the curate guiltless in the face of the evidence against him. Next I found the Major in the drawing-room and opened fire at once. "Your servant is coming down by this afternoon train, Major?" "Who sent for him?" "I did. It is as well that I should hear what he has to say." "He has nothing to say," growled the Major sulkily. "He put me to bed and took my ivory leg to his room. He wasn't near the strong room, or even downstairs." "His assurance of that will be quite sufficient, so I am glad he is coming. Mr. Newall is also on his way." "I hope he won't have the face to show here." "Indeed, he is coming down for the purpose. Miss Dreuxfield has advised him of your accusations, and he desires to clear his character." "He won't be able to. I'm certain he stole the necklace." I had my own opinion about the robbery, and held my tongue. If the Major was mixed up in the business with the valet, he had received due warning that justice was on his track. Contrary to my expectations, he was by no means startled. The man puzzled me. At 5:00 the train arrived, and with it Jenkins. My brother detective was with him, and the three of us had a conversation. Then we went to Dreuxfield Hall to see how Mr. Newall was getting on. He had come down by the same train, and had at once gone off to look after his character. It was about time, seeing the Major had done his best to spoil it. When we arrived, I left Jenkins and his escort outside in the entrance hall, as I was anxious to hear Newall's defence before producing the valet as a witness. All the gentry concerned in the matter were assembled in the drawing-room. Dreuxfield and his wife near the door, opening on to the conservatory, Onslow standing in the conservatory itself, Newall, with Kate clinging to his arm, facing the three. He was quite pale, and looked savage. "I absolutely deny the accusations of Major Onslow," he was saying when I entered. "No one knows less about the matter than I do." "What about the chloroform?" sneered Onslow, "and your hurried departure to town, and the cheque for 3,000? "All that I can explain, except the chloroform. That is a mystery to me as to you. I did spill some medicine in the afternoon, and I fancied that was the odour to which Dreuxfield alluded. When he mentioned chloroform I was startled." "I've no doubt of it." "Because," added Newall, gazing defiantly at the Major, "I had that day received a letter from my wretched cousin Clive, saying he had embezzled some money, and threatening to poison himself with chloroform unless I saved him." "That was why you turned so pale?" said Kate breathlessly. "Yes, and that was why I went to town next day. It had nothing to do with the loss of the diamonds. I drove to your lawyers and arranged to settle the matter by paying the money. Fortunately, 2 months ago I inherited £5,000, on which I had hoped to have married." "And shall marry," murmured Kate under her breath. "I sold out some stock and got the money, paid it to my lawyer, who settled the matter for my wretched cousin. I was arranging for his departure to the colonies when I heard through Kate of Major Onslow's shameless accusations. I came down here to refute them, and I have done so." "Not to my mind," growled Onslow. "I think otherwise," said Dreuxfield, taking Newell by the hand. "My dear fellow, you are as innocent as I. Forgive me for having doubted you." Mrs. Dreuxfield said words to the same effect, and Kate boldly kissed her lover before them all. It was a pleasant sight, save to the Major, who swore loudly. "This doesn't show who stole the necklace. If it wasn't Newell, who was it?" "What about yourself, Major?" said I, coming forward. The 4 people turned round in astonishment, and the Major, purple with rage, started forward. "What do you mean, sir?" he cried, with a few adjectives which I suppress. I went to the door and led in the respectable Jenkins, handcuffed. "I mean this, Major, that your valet is about the biggest thief in London. He has been long wanted for several jobs, but he managed to evade the police. Thanks to your information, he was captured at your club and brought down to give evidence against you." "Against me," said Onslow, growing grey. "I swear I had nothing to do with the theft of the necklace." There was a dead silence, and all waited for the next remark. It came from Jenkins, from the respectable Jenkins, alias Cracky Bill. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, bowing collectively, "I told the police I would give evidence against the Major in order to be brought down here. But it is a lie. My master is quite innocent, and," he added impudently, "so am I." "That won't save you, my man," said I sternly. "Your other pranks means a lifer, so you may as well confess your share in this." "Well, the Major's innocent at all events," said the rogue. "Thank you, my man," muttered Onslow thickly. I'll Here he swayed to and fro, then fell down in an apoplectic fit. There was a snap as he fell, and lo, a marvel! The butt of the ivory leg had caught in an interstice of the conservatory floor, and when he fell the leg smashed. Dreuxfield uttered a cry of astonishment and pointed to the ivory stump. From it fell a rain of diamonds. The next moment Newell and Dreuxfield were picking up the jewels, and the women were loosening the neckcloth of the old man. I gripped Jenkins by the arm and indicated the scattered jewels. "You lied! He is guilty!" "Not a bit of it," said the scamp coolly. "Don't you run your head against a stone, sir. Major Onslow hasn't been a bad master as masters go, and I'm not going to get him into trouble. He is quite innocent." "Then how did the diamonds get into the ivory leg?" "I put them there. It was this way. I wanted to steal those diamonds, and by means of a forged character I entered the Major's service. Then I watched for a chance to steal the jewels. I thought there would be no opportunity of getting out of the house during the first alarm if they were stolen, so I looked about for some safe place in which to hide them, till I could take them to London at my leisure. As I cleaned the Major's ivory leg every night, it gave me an idea. I bored a hole half-way down the leg and dropped the diamonds in one by one. They just filled the hollow nicely." "How did you steal them?" "I heard Miss Dreuxfield say at breakfast that the master was going to show them to Mr. Newell, so I watched. All my plans were made, and I waited by the strong-room door with a chloroformed handkerchief. When he came along, I used it and stole the jewels. In my own room I separated them one from the other, and dropped them into the hollow of the ivory leg. Then I plugged up the end with cotton wool and a round of ivory. The alarm was given, the Major called for his leg, and I took it to him. He went down to the hall with the diamonds safe in the ivory leg." "Ah!" cried Newell at this moment. "You helped me off with my coat. Now I understand the smell of chloroform." "I sprinkled you with a little," replied Jenkins. You see, parson, I wanted to get suspicion to fall on you. But for the smashing of the leg, I wouldn't tell all this. But I've lost the diamonds and my liberty, so it doesn't matter." The Major had by this time revived somewhat, and sat up to swear at his quondam servant. "You villain!" he said. "Oh, you villain!" "And this," said Jenkins, as we marched him out, "this is gratitude." Jenkins received the reward of his ingenuity, and passed the rest of his life in gaol for this and other offences. He always regretted not having pulled off the Duxfield fetish. The Major took himself away from Malvern, and declined to have further dealings with the Dreuxfields. They were by no means sorry, and indeed had no time to be, for shortly afterwards Kate Dreuxfield married Newell, to the delight of all. I can imagine the Major's language when he heard of the marriage. He wears a wooden leg now. The 24 diamonds were at the last drawing-room on the neck of their owner. I have no doubt that sooner or later another attempt will be made to steal them, but it is questionable whether any thief will be as ingenious as Cracky Bill, alias Jenkins. But then, it isn't every valet and thief who chances on a master with an ivory leg. End of Story 8. Story 9 of The Dwarf's Chamber and Other Stories by Fergus Hume. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Story 9. My Cousin from France. Chapter 1. It has been stated, I know not on whose authority, that everyone is more or less mad in one special direction. When such particular insanity takes a form likely to be injurious to individual existence, or to the well-being of the community at large, the person so afflicted is forthwith placed under restraint in the interests of law and order. Nevertheless, if a man be but reasonably unreasonable, and the contiguity of these words is not so incongruous as may appear, he is permitted to be at large, and to indulge in such freaks as please him. Among such harmless weaknesses may be classed stamp acquiring, picture buying, first edition hunting, china gathering, and gem collecting. Since many men have many minds, and many minds have many predilections, the list can be indefinitely prolonged. But as the tag end of the above catalogue reveals my crotchet, there is no necessity to multiply examples. To confess my hobby is requisite, as it begins and continues and ends this story. I am a gem collector. Women are enthusiasts in collecting jewels for the adornment of their beauty, but my weakness does not consent to such vanity. I wear neither ring, nor stud, nor breastpin, nor jewelled sleeve-link. It is true that for the gratification of my whim I purchase precious stones, but instead of glittering on my person, they repose on white cotton wool in glass-covered trays. To each gem is appended a ticket, inscribed with its history and value, but this information is for the enlightenment of strangers. I know my collection so well that, if needs be, I can, in the dark, lay my hand on any particular stone. I experiment occasionally with my wits in this way. The possession of these valuables inspired me with a wholesome dread of burglars. My mother and I dwelt in a lonely house some distance from Lewes, and, mindful of our isolation, we took every precaution for the preservation of the collection. We had spring guns, electric alarms, patent locks, and various other contrivances for the baffling of the thieving fraternity. I kept the key of the strong-room on my watch-chain, and never slept without a revolver under my pillow. Our house was defended and sentinelled like a fortress, but as it proved in the end, all to no purpose. I possess no collection of jewels now. After such preamble, I may as well confess that I am a bachelor. My father died while I was forming the nucleus of the collection, and when I came of age my mother urged me to marry. Being then bent solely on filling my treasury, I had no time to affect the society of the other sex, and I refused to commit myself rashly to matrimony. And although my mother, disapproving of celibacy, talked matrimony to me for quite 10 years, I still held to my freedom. If she was obstinate, I was more so, and at 35 years of age I was still single. Candour compels me to confess that selfishness was at the bottom of such persistent refusal. Often did I point out to my mother the difficulty of obtaining a partner who would fall in with our views. I might marry a woman who did not care for collecting gems, or who might insist upon wearing those I possessed. She might even grudge the expenditure of further money on adding to the hoard. To these objections my mother turned a deaf ear, and still reiterated her request. Her pertinacity was praiseworthy, but wearisome. 20 years of the cuckoo cry, "Mary, Mary, Mary," is calculated to irritate the most good-natured of men. It was the sole point on which we disagreed. "There is my niece, Oswald," said my mother one morning, hot on her favourite topic, "your cousin Mathilde Barbeau. You know all about her." "Let me see," said I, polishing a newly acquired cameo. "Do I know all about her, mother? Your sister, my aunt, married M. Barbeau, who is a merchant at Cairo. Who was a merchant at Cairo," corrected my mother. "You forget, Oswald, he died 6 months ago." "So he did, and sorry was I to hear it. He sent me that large turquoise yonder, and very cheap it was. Well, mother?" "She is an orphan, Oswald." "I know that, mother, and a very rich orphan too, as I have heard you say." "She is certainly well off, but money does not make up for love." "So they say." "Well?" "How indifferent you are, Oswald. I wish you to particularly note what I say. Mathilde, finding herself lonely in Cairo, has written to ask if she can come to us." "To come here? To this house?" "And why not, Oswald? She is your cousin and my niece." "I don't deny the relationship, mother, but reflect. We have never seen her. She may be an undesirable addition to our household. You are happy, mother, and I shall be still happier when you are married to a woman of whom I approve, Oswald." "Ho, ho," I chuckled, now seeing her aim. "And you approve of your niece as a possible Mrs. Danefield?" "I think she will make you a good wife, Oswald. You need not laugh. For all you know, she may be an angel." "True, and for all you know, she may be the reverse. I should like to have some idea of what she is like. Why does she not send her portrait?" "She did, but it was lost on the way. You know how careless those foreign officials are. But we shall soon be able to judge of her for ourselves. She is at Marseilles." "Indeed! I understood you to say she was at Cairo." "You have not been listening, Oswald," said my mother reprovingly. "I mentioned some time ago that she had left Cairo for Marseilles. Thence she goes to Paris to stay a few days with her school friend, Madame Charlotte. I am to write to her at that address. Now, what am I to say?" "Ask her to come by all means. If she takes after your family, mother, she is sure to be delightful." "Foolish, foolish boy," said my mother, beaming at the compliment. "But to tell you the truth, Oswald, I do not know whom she takes after. M. Barbeau and I did not get on well, and, influenced by her husband, my sister corresponded very rarely with me. After her death, M. Barbeau was not very friendly." "He sent me the turquoise, however. But how much do you know of Mathilde?" "Only that she was educated at the Pension des Anglais, and is a quiet little creature. Thanks to her mother, she writes and speaks English pretty well. This letter is admirably written for a foreigner." "How old is she?" 25, I believe. 10 years younger than you, Oswald. I always think," added my mother artfully, "that a wife should be 10 years younger than her husband." "Oh, mother, mother, you are driving me to the altar. I trust I shall like Cousin Mathilde, but I cannot promise to fall in love with her." "Oswald," hinted my mother impressively, "she is fond of gems." "All women are, for that matter, mother. I dare say she'll ask leave to wear the cream of my collection before she's been a week in the house. Does she know about my treasures?" "Of course she does. Did not her father send you that turquoise? He doubtless told Mathilde, for she used to write to me from school, asking after her English cousin and his jewels." "Very kind of her, mother. No doubt she thinks I own a gem-encrusted Aladdin's cave. Do you wish me to cross over to Paris and escort her?" No, Monsieur Chat is probably coming to London on business, so you can meet her at Newhaven." "Very good. Ask her to send a portrait so that I may be able to distinguish her in the crowd." But no portrait arrived. Probably it was never asked for, as my mother's memory is not what it used to be. However, she duly wrote and invited Cousin Mathilde to make her home with us. In due time a letter arrived, stating that the young lady was staying in Paris with her friends the Sharretts, and would come over to England via Dieppe under the protection of the husband. A postscript stated that she was anxious to salute her cousin Oswald, and to view his collection. From this I argued an artful nature. Perhaps it is hardly fair to say this, as her letters, written in fair English, conveyed to my mind a timid, homely personality of no great beauty and much common sense. I talked so much about our French relative to my mother that she assumed quite a concrete form in my mind. Small, delicately made, with gentle ways and a low voice to match her downcast eyes. This was the imaginary portrait I had drawn, and which had created an impression upon me. I actually considered the possibility of a marriage in the near future, and pictured this trustful creature winning her way into our hearts, and creeping about the house like a bright-eyed mouse. Strange to say, now that there was a probability of her wishes being gratified, my mother warned me against being too sanguine. She swung round like a weathercock, and hinted at disappointment the very morning I left to meet Mathilde at Newhaven. "I trust she will prove as delightful as you think, Oswald," said my inconsistent parent, "but we must not hope for too much. Remember, we have never seen her, and she may be quite the reverse of what we expect." "Just what I remarked a fortnight ago, mother. You then answered, 'Oh, now go, Oswald, or you will be late. I shall expect you home to dinner with Mathilde.'" Thus did my mother evade being worsted. Before I could further denounce her change of front, she had me out of the house, and I drove off to Lewes, greatly amused at her inconsistency. Her main objection was based on our ignorance of Mathilde's looks, nature, and behaviour. I was extremely curious to see this bone of contention, if one dared speak so disrespectfully of a young lady, and as the Dieppe packet swung into its berth I carefully examined the passengers' faces. Not a glimpse could I catch of the homely personality I expected to see, and I began to think that Mathilde had not come. Indeed, convinced of her non-arrival, I was about to repair to the telegraph office, when a tall young lady, accompanied by a gentleman, planted herself before me and held out her hand. "My cousin!" she exclaimed in French, then, noting my bewilderment, she added, "Are you not Monsieur Danefield?" "Yes, I am Oswald Danefield, and you?" "I am Mathilde Barbeau, your cousin. I recognized you by the portrait sent by your good mother. Ah, it is good of you to welcome me. But I have been well guarded since leaving Paris. Permit me, my cousin, Monsieur Charette, the husband of my dear friend Adèle." The smart-looking Frenchman grinned and bowed, and took off his hat with a flourish. Although rather amazed by the difference between the real and the ideal Mathilde, I was sufficiently self-controlled to return his greeting. After a short conversation about the fatigues of travelling and the embarrassment of luggage, we boarded the express. At Lewes, Monsieur Charette took a polite farewell of me, an effusive one of Mathilde, and then proceeded on his way to London. The carriage was waiting for us at the station, and having seen to Mathilde's trunk, we drove home. On the steps my mother awaited our arrival. "I am delighted to see you, my dear," said she to Mathilde. Our guest looked puzzled for a moment, then replied in the most execrable English, "I have no Inglis. I speak it bad." Remembering how my mother had boasted of Mathilde's linguistic acquirements, I thought this extremely strange. Chapter 2. I have not yet mentioned that my cousin was a beautiful woman. Such omission must be set down to the bewilderment caused by my finding Mathilde so different from what I had expected her to be. When our intercourse became more familiar, I had time to examine her looks, to watch her behaviour, and by noting both I strove to arrive at a conclusion as to her character. All this took some weeks, and over a month elapsed before I learned to accept her as a member of our circle. That I am of a retiring disposition I put down to the quietness of my daily life, the lack of feminine society, and to my absorption in my hobby. He who is habituated to a placid existence is apt to feel nervous in the society of one acquainted with the great world. I know not where Mathilde, whose existence had been passed between school and Cairo, learned her airs and graces and aplomb, but she was certainly better instructed in life than either my mother or myself. We were both a trifle afraid of this stately woman, and noting this, she did her best to remove the impression. No daughter could have been more devoted to my mother, no sister could have been kinder to me. Yet my mother, lenient as were her judgments, confessed to a certain distrust of Mathilde. Despite the kindly disposition of the one and the deference of the other, they did not get on well together. Probably the absence of sympathy on the part of Mathilde had something to do with this, but whatever it was, the result was decidedly unsatisfactory. The elder woman actually went to the length of lamenting the lack of confidence between them. "I don't know how it is, Oswald," she said, after an unusually trying day with Mathilde, "but I cannot get on with her. She might be a stranger instead of my sister's child." "Difference of nationality, perhaps? But she is half English, yet there is not a drop of her poor dear mother's blood in her." "Takes after Monsieur Barbot, no doubt, mother. I can't say I'm altogether pleased with her myself, but you must make some allowance. Luz after Cairo is rather a change. It is our duty to make her comfortable, which I'm sure we do," said my mother in parentheses, "and to love her as much as possible. That is," I added hastily, for my mother looked oddly at me, "to love her as a relation." "I hope you don't love her in any other way, Oswald." "I don't. Yet 3 months ago you—" "Times are changed, Oswald. I would not like Mathilde as a daughter-in-law." "Well, certainly I would not care for her as my wife." My mother, finding the conversation unsatisfactory, went off to harry the servants, who were never up to her standard of excellence. I retired to the strong room, busied myself with my jewels, and wondered if I could be brought to love Mathilde. She was beautiful and graceful, no doubt, but there was something feline about her that frequently inspired me with a distaste for her mere presence. I fancy the dislike was mutual. In unguarded moments a glance oftentimes revealed the feeling she so carefully kept hidden. Love, indeed! There was but little chance of that between two who were the antithesis of one another. While I was thus musing, Mathilde made her appearance, and with characteristic cunning she saluted me with a smile. "Pardon me, my cousin, but you promised to show me the new jewel." She spoke in French, as was her custom. Often did we ask her to speak English, but she always excused herself on the plea of an imperfect acquaintance with the language. The early death of her mother and the habit of Monsieur Barbot to converse in French with his daughter doubtless accounted for her deficiency in this respect. Yet for one who wrote such excellent English letters I thought it strange. "Come in, Mathilde," said I, picking up a gem. "Here is the chrysoprase. Very fine, is it not?" "Oh, but it is charming!" she exclaimed, clasping her hands. "And so rare a stone. I never saw one before." "The chrysoprase is little known, but you will find it mentioned in the Book of Revelation. I forgot. You are a Catholic, Mathilde, and no doubt prefer breviary to Bible." "Do you care for either, my cousin?" said she, rather wickedly, whereat I affected to examine the beauties of the gem. She had nothing to do with my religious convictions, but after a few minutes spent in looking at the collection, she picked up the thread of conversation where it had dropped. "If I do not read my Bible," said she, looking round the room, "I at least know something of the 1001 Nights. Oh yes, I have read the translation of Monsieur Galland. There is a story called The Wonderful Lamp, my cousin. You have this lamp, no doubt, to possess such wonderful treasures." "Unfortunately, I have no attendant genie, Mathilde. All these jewels are bought and paid for." "There is money here." "About 10,000 pounds, I should say." "Ah," said she, drawing a long breath. "And in francs?" 250,000 francs." My cousin, you are a Monte Cristo. I wonder you are not afraid of thieves." "I am afraid of thieves, my cousin, and I take every precaution against them. The walls and roof and door of this room are of sheet iron. As you see, the window is strongly barred, and I carry the sole key which gives admittance on my watch chain. No burglar could enter here." "But thieves are so clever," she said wisely. "Will you take the jewels, Mathilde," said I jokingly, "and relieve me of the responsibility?" "Do not tempt me. Had I those jewels, I should wear them, and not waste their beauty in this cell." "I fear you have not the soul of a gem collector, Mathilde." "That goes without saying, my cousin. I am a woman." And she was truly a woman in her vanity and love of display. Yet, despite these defects, many would have yielded to the influence of those dark eyes and to the invitation of those smiling lips. But I was as ice under the fire of her glances. Perhaps my faculty of love had died from sheer inanition, or perhaps the feeling of antipathy neutralized it, but I certainly did not care for Mathilde. My mother was pleased at my attitude, for she liked Mathilde as little as I did. There was a reason for this, but we did not find it out till long afterwards, and then it was too late. Chapter 3. 2 months of this life proved unsatisfactory. It jarred. I cannot honestly blame Mathilde, for she tried her best to be agreeable, but her efforts proved futile. Our domestic machine, which used to run smoothly as on oiled wheels, was now out of gear and jolted horribly. I felt it, my mother felt it, and I think Mathilde felt it also, though she said nothing about it. Her transplantation experiment was a distinct failure. She recognized that. The best thing she could do was to leave us to relapse into our old ways and go back to her alien life. In the end, that is what she did. "My good aunt," she said, in the unemotional voice which was her greatest defect, "you are very good to me, and my cousin also is most amiable. But I must go away." "I hope there is nothing wrong, Mathilde," faltered my mother, feeling guilty. "Nothing that you or I can change, dear one. It is that my ways are not your ways. I am of a different nature. I have been trained in a different fashion. Every moment I do things which are not according to your English ideas. Your life is quiet and charming and full of sweetness, but it is not my life." "You find it dull." "Not dull. I find it impossible. See you, aunt, I cannot explain. Perhaps my cousin can." "I am afraid not, Mathilde." "Oh, I know," she said, nodding her head. "It is hard to explain, but easy to feel. I thank you both for your kindness, but next week I will return to Adèle Charette at Paris. What say you, my aunt?" "I do not wish you to stay if you would rather go, my love. But if you think—" "Ah, then it is settled," said Mathilde, in what I thought was a tone of relief. "I shall write for Monsieur Charette to come over for me." I offered to save Monsieur Charette the trouble. It was the least I could do, but my services were declined by Mathilde. She wrote to Paris, and in due time received an answer that Monsieur Charette was coming over on business, and he would call at Lewes on his way back to escort her, as requested. When the evening of her departure was settled, for she elected to go by the night mail to convenience Monsieur Charette, my mother became quite tearful. In the tenderness of her heart she blamed herself for the girl's decision. "But indeed it is not my fault, Oswald. I have done my best. My dear mother, you are hospitality itself. For my part, I am pleased she is going." "Our quiet life does not suit her." "Evidently not. She prefers the society of Madame Charette and the gay city." During that week we were constant in our attentions to Mathilde, and recognizing our efforts to please her, she made herself extraordinarily agreeable. But the result was a failure, and the old distrust still continued. We all three felt that we were acting a comedy, and would be glad when it was over. The curtain fell on a Wednesday, and on a situation that was as unexpected as it was disagreeable. Monsieur Charette arrived shortly before dinner, and was made welcome. I cannot say that I liked him. He was a slender man of the negroid type, which offended my racial prejudices. It was no news to me to learn that he came from Martinique. Frizzly hair, opal-tinted nails, and thick lips betrayed his African blood. However, we overcame our distaste for his society, and made his 3 hours' stay as pleasant as possible. All was prepared for the departure of my cousin. Her large black trunk had been brought downstairs and deposited near the strong room. I ordered the brougham to be at the door at 9:30 to take them to Lewes, as they were to catch the 10:17 express for Newhaven. These arrangements having been made, we sat down to dinner. Long before the meal was over, my mother was forced to seek her room. She complained of feeling ill, and, with many excuses, retired to lie down. I was thus left to entertain our guests, and cannot say I found much difficulty in doing so. The two were capital company. Mathilde threw off her reserve in the presence of a compatriot, and was quite brilliant in talk and speech. Being of an observant nature, I noted the glances she exchanged with Charette, and began to pity the absent wife. I had a vague idea that all was not right, that Mathilde had not read her native novelists for nothing, and that the Frenchman with the bold eyes and sniggering laugh was a consummate scoundrel. I was glad my mother had left the table. I was glad Mathilde was going, and I caught myself saying something about mixed races and double faces. Dinner over, Mathilde went to take leave of my mother, and we two men retired to the smoking-room. Frankly speaking, I should have preferred that my cousin came with us, as her conduct had so revolted me that I felt her mere presence to be an insult to my mother. We had entertained the opposite of an angel unawares, and I was glad she was going away. During her absence, Charette talked of himself, and in 100 little ways betrayed his low moral tone. I allow considerable latitude to some men in consideration of their upbringing and natural instincts, but I object to rake their minds for concentrated vice. My guest was an iniquitous scoundrel, and respectable as was the room and employment, I felt as though I were assisting at some low orgy. Some men have the faculty of poisoning the air by looks and words. I was relieved when Mathilde made her appearance with the coffee, as it put an end to the conversation of Charette. My cousin handed me a cup with her own hands, mentioning that it was the last service she would be able to do me. Then she accepted a cigarette from the Frenchman. I do not approve of women smoking, but her doing so seemed in keeping with the tainted atmosphere of the room. I have bidden my aunt adieu, said Mathilde, and all is ready to go. But we have yet an hour. Could you not show Monsieur Charette your jewels, my cousin? Not to-night. It is too dark to see them properly. This was untrue, as the strong room was lighted by electricity, but I could not bring myself to show such a mark of friendship to Charette. He seemed the kind of man who would knock one on the head, if he had the chance, and go off with the whole collection. Of course, such an idea is absurd, and I merely mention it as a proof of the disagreeable way in which Charette affected me. The scowl with which he greeted my refusal strongly accentuated his negroid traits, but he possessed sufficient tact to pass the matter over lightly. On some other occasion monsieur may favour me, he said, smiling. I was resolved that such other occasion should never arrive. The way in which Charette and Mathilde looked at one another made me again pity the wife in Paris. But at this moment I began to grow drowsy. Instead of tending to wakefulness, the coffee induced me to sleep. It was most remarkable. I struggled vainly against the lethargic feeling, but my head fell on my breast and my eyes closed. The last thing I remember was Charette and Mathilde whispering eagerly together. The next moment I was sound asleep. Chapter 4. I awoke next morning to find myself seated before the fireless grate. Bewildered by the novelty of the situation, it was some time before I could collect my thoughts sufficiently to account for my position. It was entirely opposed to my usual habits. With some misgivings I recollected the strange behaviour of Mathilde, and rang the bell. When the butler appeared he looked astonished at seeing me still in evening dress, and even more so when I questioned him on the events which had taken place the previous night. "I must have fallen asleep in my chair, Bates. Why did you not wake me before going to bed?" "Beg pardon, sir, but Mademoiselle Barbot told me not to disturb you." "Is Mademoiselle gone?" "Yes, sir. She went with the French gentleman to catch the 10:17 express. I hope, sir, that nothing is wrong." "No, Bates, nothing is wrong. That will do." I went up to my bedroom, took a cold bath, and dressed myself for the day. All the time my thoughts were busy with the unaccountable fact that I had slept in the smoking room. It seemed strange that Mathilde should be so solicitous for my comfort. However, I had no reason to think anything was wrong, so dismissing the subject, I paid my usual morning visit to my mother, whom I found much better. Afterwards I repaired to the strong room. As usual, I opened the door with the key attached to my watch chain. Then I received a shock. The cases were shattered, the jewels were gone, the place was as bare as the palm of my hand. It was quite 5 minutes before I could force my brain to work, my will to act. The loss of £10,000 is apt to disarrange one's faculties. Mathilde, Charette. I kept repeating these names in a stupefied fashion, as though I expected their owners to appear and restore the stolen jewels. Stolen? Certainly. But by my cousin and her friend? Impossible. The mere idea was terrible. Yet she might have been coerced by Charette. With a brain as clear as crystal, after the fashion of brains at such moments, I rapidly constructed a theory to account for existent facts. Here it is. Charette had designed the theft, and had carried out the plan with the assistance of Mathilde. She had drugged my coffee, and, while I slept, had stolen the key of the strong room from my watch chain. The rest was easy. They had packed the jewels in Mathilde's trunk, closed the strong room door, replaced the key, and had made off with their plunder. By this time they were in Paris. I made no outcry, for as one of the culprits was my cousin, I deemed it advisable to keep the matter quiet, at all events for the present. Locking the now empty strong room, I interrogated the butler. "At what time did Mademoiselle Barbot leave?" "About 9:30, sir." Exactly 1 hour to clear the place, I thought, remembering Mathilde's remark, then added aloud, "Mademoiselle took her trunk with her?" "Yes, sir. It was placed on the brougham, according to your orders." That was the irony of the thing. By my orders the means had been provided for their flight. I have no doubt that the trunk was filled with my collection, but it was useless to ask further questions. I made up my mind to a course and acted. Ordering a portmanteau to be packed, I repaired to my mother's room. She was on the point of descending to the breakfast room. "Are you better this morning, mother?" "Much better, thank you, Oswald, but I have a slight headache still." "So have I. We have both been drugged." "Oswald!" "It is true, mother. Your wine and my coffee were drugged, and while we were asleep, Mathilde and her precious friend Charette have carried off all my jewels." "Mathilde rob you? Are you mad?" "Not I. Come down to the strong room if you don't believe me, mother. It is quite empty. She stole the key from my watch chain, put the jewels in her trunk, and drove off with it to the station in our brougham." "My own niece! Oswald, what is to be done?" "I am going to Paris this morning, and will call at the Charettes'. I do not suppose I shall find monsieur at home, but I shall put the police—" "The police, Oswald! Your cousin!" "I'll do what I can to save her, mother, but I cannot afford to lose £10,000 without making an effort to regain it." "Hush, mother, do not cry." "My own niece, Oswald." "We are well rid of her, mother. I think myself she is a bad lot." I passed over my mother's lamentations and the futile theories she put forward to prove the innocence of Mathilde. By noon I was on my way to Paris with Mathilde's letter, written from the Charettes' address, to accept our invitation. She little thought when she penned that letter that it would some day prove a trap to catch her. By such trifles do we weave nets for our own snaring. There is no need to describe the journey. I duly arrived at my destination, left my portmanteau at the nearest hotel, and then, notwithstanding the lateness of the hour, drove at once to the Charettes'. There I received a shock. Both Monsieur and Madame Charette were away, explained the concierge. They had been gone some days. But the mad Mademoiselle Barbot was still within. This information pleased me. I should at least be able to reproach Mathilde with her wickedness. But why did the concierge call her mad? The epithet was inapplicable to so ingenious a schemer. However, I wasted no time in vain inquiries, but mounted the stairs and rang at the door of the Charettes'. A pretty little maid, who looked as though she had been crying, made her appearance. I saw at a glance that she was no servant, and shaped my speech accordingly. "Pardon me, but is Mademoiselle Barbot within?" "I am Mademoiselle Barbot, monsieur." The announcement took away my breath. I looked at her in astonishment, and in that brief glance felt satisfied that she had spoken the truth. There was a far-off resemblance to my mother in her face, and in all respects she was the bright-eyed little mouse of whom I had dreamed. But if this were the real Mathilde, who was the false one? I lost no time in learning that fact. "I am Oswald Danefield." "My cousin!" she cried in English, which, by the way, she spoke excellently well. "Oh, how thankful I am to see you! Come in, Oswald. I have so much to tell you." She led me into an untidy room, and giving me a chair, sat down near me. Then for the first time I saw that she looked ill and worn. The remark of the concierge occurred to my mind. "Why do they call you mad, Mathilde?" "Ah, why indeed, Oswald?" she said sadly. "I am not mad. I came here to stay with Adèle Charette and her husband, but when I wanted to leave, on receiving your dear mother's letter, they said I was mad, and shut me up in a little room. I have been there for 2 months, watched by old Madame Charette. Not once did I see Adèle or her husband." "Could you not have escaped?" "No, Oswald, the old woman kept the door locked, and when I cried out she told the tenants I was mad and was shortly to be removed to an asylum." "Where is the old woman now?" "I don't know. She went away this morning. I found the door of my room open and came out. To night I was going to write to you, but now there is no need. Oh, Oswald, how I have suffered! What does it mean?" "It means robbery, Mathilde. Was Adèle a tall, dark, handsome woman?" "Yes, she was my friend at school, and I loved her so. To think she should be so cruel! But you talk of robbery, Oswald." "I do. You spoke of my jewels to your friend." "Yes. Was it wrong?" "Very wrong, as it turns out," said I grimly. "Adèle Charette impersonated you, and has been staying with us for the last 2 months. Last night her husband joined her. They drugged me, and went off with £10,000 worth of jewels." "But how could she impersonate me?" cried Mathilde, astonished at this recital. "She knew no English." "Oh, she accounted for that in a very ingenious way. Besides, we had never seen you, nor had we your portrait. There was no reason to think that Adèle was not the real Mathilde." "Oh, how wicked! But Monsieur Charette was a terrible man, and made Adèle as evil as himself. She was not so at school." "I trust not, for the credit of the school. But now I know that you are not a thief. I shall set the police on the track of the 3 Charettes." "I a thief?" said Mathilde indignantly. "Under the name of Adèle Charette only. I thought it was my cousin who stole the jewels." "Oh, it is terrible! And now, Oswald—" "Now I shall take you back to England, my dear. It was a pity you spoke about the jewels, else they might never have conceived and carried out their clever plot. No wonder my mother and I did not like Adèle. However, we may yet catch and punish them." Brave talk indeed, but we never did catch them. The 3 baffled the French police, escaped to Spain, and thence sailed for South America. In those lawless lands south of the line they were safe from pursuit, and now I have no doubt they are living on the proceeds of their nefarious scheme. It was cleverly conceived and cleverly carried out. They learned all necessary details from the unsuspecting Mathilde, and framed their plans accordingly. I now understood the glances which passed between my so-called cousin from France and Monsieur Charette. Also how we had failed to love her. She was as evil as was her husband. They were a well-matched pair, and no doubt the mother, whom I learned was a quadroon from Martinique, was as bad as either. However, it was no use lamenting. The game was played out, and I had lost my collection. I have never had the heart to begin another. The risk is too great. I took my real cousin back to Lewes, and she became a member of our household. Great was the indignation of my mother when she learned how we had been deceived. No wonder I could not love her, Oswald. It was instinct. We found no difficulty in loving the second Mathilde Barbot. In fact, out of evil came good. Deprived of my collection, I turned my thoughts to matrimony, and much to my mother's delight, I married Mathilde. She became my hobby, and I have no fear of her being stolen. However, as I miss my jewels, and I am unable to form another collection, I propose to devote myself to stamps. There is just as much interest and less risk. End of Story 9. End of The Dwarf's Chamber and Other Stories by Fergus Hume.